So of course, without getting into too much detail, you just tell us where you were born and a tiny bit about what it was like growing up here. Very, very tiny bit.
Yeah, I was born here in Phoenix and raised here in Phoenix with the high school here, grade school, high school, and I really had a very traumatic childhood, a very early childhood with my father having muscular dystrophy and a lot of stress in the family with health issues early on as a child. But I will just cut right to the chase as far as my life really beginning to take off with athletics.
Yeah.
You know, with basically a normal childhood with lots of stress from health from my father, as I just said.
Yeah.
But my life really took off once my blood brother came home from the Korean War and was lifting weights and was a bodybuilder. And they had free weights on the ship. He was in the Navy. He came home and he was bodybuilding, and I saw my brother pumping iron, and he started buying weightlifting magazines, and I saw these bodybuilders early on, maybe in the 5th grade, like I was in the 5th grade when I first started working out, and I said, I cannot believe what I'm looking at, the bodybuilders. And so my brother, when I was in the 5th grade, took me to the old Burt Goodrich's gym, downtown Phoenix, a very famous name if you go back into the history of bodybuilding, and bought a membership for me. And I began bodybuilding in the 5th grade and was completely obsessed with the physiques and the big arms and the bodies of the bodybuilders. And so once my brother began to go in different directions, I would even walk all the way downtown Phoenix and hitchhike and hitchhike back and get a workout. And I was so dedicated in the 5th and 6th grade that I had struck out on my own to get to the gym. And so that's when my life really, really, really took off. I was so enthused and so I admired these bodybuilders, and it was like I was looking at people who weren't even real, that it really jump-started my athletic career as my future athletic career.
And can you tell us what high school you went to and a bit about your high school athletic career?
Oh, I went to North Phoenix High School, and I graduated in 1961, and in that era, 61, 60, 59, 58, that 4 years of high school, there were only about 4 or 5, 6 maybe major high schools in the Phoenix metropolitan area, so it was very competitive, the high school spirit. And I had picked up I'd really gotten into track and field, and I really had been a major success in high school in track and field with shot put, discus, decathlon, and I probably, if I would have gone on to college, which I had college scholarship offers from my accomplishments in track and field, I could have gone to maybe I believe it was the 61 or 62 Olympics in Mexico City. And my high school coach believed that 4 years from my time of graduating from high school, I could have made the Olympics in one of those chosen sports.
And what made you not go that route?
What made me not go to college
Yes.
was and continue my athletic pursuits, which I was very, very accomplished at naturally. It was just in me to do it.
They still talk about you, I hear, in Phoenix, some of your high school athletics.
Yes, it was amazing. I was very gifted. It was just a natural gift, my athletic ability. I just didn't have the discipline. Once I became of age and I started running around with seniors as I was a freshman, and so a 4-year gap with older guys, I would go out with them, hanging out with them, and they'd be cruising up and down the streets looking for girls and having parties, and so that I kind of backslid away from sports in that sense, except bodybuilding. I still continued to bodybuild during my high school years. But then once I graduated and should have gone on to college, I just got out into the world and got lost in the things of the world.
Right, and you, when you were cruising the streets in those days, you were said in your book that you got into a lot of fights. Was that kind of fun for you, or what was going on?
It was. There were so many fights in Phoenix. It was like a phenomenon. All the guys, as I said, that I ran around with were seniors. I was a freshman, and they were already graduating, in the process of graduating, and had their cars and cruising, and it was just a thing to do. Fighting was just a thing to do in Phoenix, and so I just fell into it and became accomplished at it, and because I believe, obviously, because of my strength from powerlifting, weightlifting, bodybuilding, doing all sorts of weightlifting at the time, gave me an edge, and it was just something that was a strange phenomenon about Phoenix and young kids, high school kids fighting. It was amazing.
And is that what made you want to get into boxing? I understand you had a short-lived boxing career.
I did have a short-lived boxing career. I really enjoyed boxing and watching boxing on television. It was nationally televised at the time. And I really enjoyed it. And they had a thing called the Golden Gloves here in Phoenix. And my friends, half the guys I ran around with, had body bags and speed bags, and they liked boxing, and it just came naturally with the fighting. And so I enjoyed the boxing and entered several Golden Gloves tournaments, did quite well. Never really won a tournament, but enjoyed the boxing and thought maybe I'll be a pro, but that never came to pass, and I'm glad it didn't.
And it was around that time that you took a bit of another turn, and you went into preaching a little bit, and you would perform feats of strength, and you kind of put your own twist on preaching and became almost obsessed with it, from what I understand. Can you tell us?
Oh, yes.
How you went from being such a troubled
yes
to going in the complete opposite direction and trying to actually help people and
yes
people to God.
It was a major conversion. And from being a heathen, as we were described, to being a godly young man and wanting to be a minister, and being around, it was like can't pull up the word now, but a trend at the time of preaching was very, very in the early 60s. The preaching movement, the Billy Graham evangelistic, Oral Roberts evangelistic crusades, the big tent revivals were very popular in the United States. And so I got swept up into that and sucked into and pulled into that environment, and actually started preaching, and did, as you mentioned, did some feats of strength to show young people that yes, you can be strong and still serve God, because it was a natural blemish to be, a Christian, a so-called Christian, and a good, nice person, and believe in God, and still be athletic and strong. It was like, it doesn't work, it doesn't mix. And so I set out to prove that it did mix.
And in those days, some of the more experienced preachers, they actually kind of saw you as a young up-and-comer, and some of them kind of took you under their wing, gave you some shots at preaching on a larger scale, and you traveled around a bit.
Evangelistic.
Yeah. Why do you think you were so good at that? Are you just a great talker?
Maybe it was, of course, the evangelists and the preachers and the church group as a whole would call it, you were anointed by the Holy Ghost of God to proclaim the gospel. They believed everything was divine, a divine intervention. And I believed it also because I was 19 years old, 20 years old, so I believed I was called to be in the ministry. And But then I began to see things in the ministry that I found out that everything wasn't as it appeared to be, and that human beings really are human beings. Flesh and blood really is flesh and blood, and there is the lust of the flesh, and that I began to get a little bit not as confident in the gospel. I was confident in the gospel, what it said, the actual Bible and the readings of the Bible, the scriptures, but not the people involved in it.
And you ended up back in Phoenix, back to bouncing after your preaching career had kind of, the early part of it had fizzled out. What brought you back to Phoenix?
Well, it was home.
Yeah.
It was home, and, I was comfortable here. And I came back and really started getting into powerlifting and bodybuilding at that time, and became a bouncer, a complete reversal from being a minister and speaking in youth camps and things like that, to becoming a bouncer in a nightclub.
And can you tell us a bit about this nightclub? I remember reading about it. It had several levels, and there was different music on each level.
It was a very unique nightclub called JD's, and they had a country and western. It was a double-decker nightclub. Upstairs was country and western music, and downstairs was hardcore rock and roll. And we probably had a staff of about 10 bouncers, 5 up and 5 down, and it was just continually throwing people out of this nightclub because of the drinking and excess, and especially the western, the cowboys who thought they were cowboys upstairs always caused the most problems when they started drinking. So there were continually fighting, just throwing drunks and guys that were just had lost it, and very few would fight back. Occasionally a few would fight back, and which was a nice challenge and brought out a very good response from us.
And you've said in the past that you were so big that people would actually come from other towns to challenge you, and I've heard one story about a big, huge Samoan guy even came from some far-off place to challenge you one night.
Actually, he didn't come from a far-off place. He came from Arizona State University, which is right across the riverbed, the Salt River, from the nightclub. And for some reason, he became very intoxicated. He was an All-American at ASU, and Samoan. And Samoans are very tough folks. The Tahitians and the Islanders are very, very tough people. And for some reason, he got very, very intoxicated one night, came into the nightclub calling out my name out of the clear blue sky, wanting to challenge me to a fight. And I was aware that he was almost an All-American at ASU, and very tough. And I decided, well, I better get a shot in while he's not looking to take advantage of him, because I really don't think I want to get involved with this guy, because he's very, very legitimately tough, and it's just not necessary, and he's very intoxicated. And so we had a brief altercation, and I was able to get on top, get behind, and put a legitimate chokehold across his throat. And as this was happening, they called the local police department, Tempe Police Department, suburb of Phoenix. And as the police arrived, I had him in this reverse type chokehold, and they came up with the mace to spray him so he would drop. And as he lifted up the can of mace spray, he ducked, and I got the mace face forward. And so I obviously released my chokehold on the Samoan, Tahitian, whatever he was, and then they arrested him and took him away for disorderly conduct. And I had burning eyes the rest of the night. And then years later, as I was wrestling in Hawaii, he was actually there, and we met on the streets, and we gave each other a big hug and laughed about our brief encounter at the nightclub in Phoenix.
So So obviously you were really earning your money at the nightclub, taking on challengers that would
Yes.
come to want to face this big monster of a man. And somewhere around this time, you got an offer to go to Calgary and become a pro wrestler. Now, how did that come about?
Well, actually, I got an offer to become a pro football player first
Okay.
by the wrestler who was wrestling in Calgary in the off season, and he introduced me to pro football and said, "Hey, you're strong." At this time, I was bench pressing right around 600 pounds. I was extremely agile and very, very, very strong. And he says, "God," he said, "you'd be a natural at pro football." And so I played for Calgary Stampeders. He says, "Come on up and try out." And what was I doing? I was just bouncing in a nightclub. I had nothing to do. So it was basically on a whim that I drove from Phoenix to Calgary to try out for the Calgary Stampeders. And I didn't like it right from the start because it was really hard hitting. It was very pro football is alignment. I was playing defensive end, and it was very hard hitting. I didn't like the actual trauma to the body, and but I did well. I did well enough that when I was released by the Calgary Stampeders, Montreal picked me up and brought me into Montreal for the rest of the preseason and a couple of season games, and then cut me at that point.
And before we move on, you want to just talk about Montreal a little bit? I know you like that city. And you do have a lot of fans there still.
Yes, I really, really enjoyed Montreal. The football, when I was there, the football fans were just ecstatic. The city was full of life, full of energy. Of course, the population was very energetic, and it was just a really exciting city. And I really like Montreal, and I think it's one of my favorite cities of all time.
And in those days, it was rare to see a physical specimen like yourself. Bodybuilding certainly wasn't that popular at that time, and you were really fairly lean and big. How was it with the women between the pro sports and the gym and bouncing? I'm sure you had quite a few lady admirers at that time.
Well, it was really, I think, a mixture of all of those things that you just mentioned, plus alcohol. So with the women getting intoxicated and the men getting intoxicated, I think the alcohol led to those other excursions you're talking about. And I did find that Montreal probably had the most beautiful women that I ever seen in any magazine or in person, really, in my life, and probably still does to this day. So I want to say hello to all my fans of Montreal.
So you had your little forte into football. Did you go back to bouncing after that before you went into wrestling?
Yes.
Did you know about wrestling at all while you were playing football in Calgary? How did it work?
I went back to bouncing in JD's at the nightclub, and the pro football player who had brought me up to try out for the Calgary Stampeders said, "Well, now, why don't you try out for wrestling?" Because he was wrestling there in the off season for Stu Hart Promotions in Calgary.
Right.
And I said, "Well, sure, I'll give that a try." I was just so free at that time of my life. I just had nothing to hold me back, no reason to stay put. And so I left Phoenix, Arizona in January of 1970, and it was 75 degrees. And I drove to Calgary, following my friend, to wrestle in the off season, the football off season. And when we arrived in Calgary about 3 days later, following the Rocky Mountain chain, getting colder and colder and colder, and arrived in Calgary, and they were having one of the real cold spells, and I remember the wind chill factor was like 50 below zero, and I just came from 75 degrees above zero, and my car doors had froze shut, and I was in this frozen wasteland, and I I said, my God, my eyelashes were freezing together walking to a store, and everything was just so, you were so isolated. You had to stay inside, and I was such an outsider, laying in the sun and training and that type of a lifestyle, that all of a sudden you became isolated. You had to be isolated to live and endure with 30, 40, 50 below temperatures. And so I didn't like that part of it whatsoever. It was really a shock to my system when I arrived in Calgary to begin my wrestling career.
Did you know anything about wrestling at that time? Did you think it was a work? Did you think it was a shoot? What were the thoughts going on in your head?
All I knew about wrestling was what I had seen on television in Phoenix, which was then, as a kid, nationally televised, I think by the DuPont Network, the old DuPont Network. If historians would know this. And I would watch it as a young kid and was mesmerized by these wrestlers. And I watched it with intensity, not knowing that I would actually try to be a wrestler someday. And one name came up during this period of time that you may recall, being a wrestling historian, the name of Sky High Lee, a very famous wrestler at one time, was, I think, maybe one of the first kind of giants in the wrestling. He kind of had giant features. Well, Sky High Lee turned out to be very ironic, my wife's mother's second cousin. Of all things, my future wife Valerie, her mother, Sky High Lee, actually was her first cousin. And so I had a relationship through marriage to Sky High Lee. And when I found that out, I was thrilled, of course. And but I had no other knowledge about pro wrestling whatsoever.
And you came to actually one of the toughest territories there was in pro wrestling, not only because they did a very rough style, but because it was very cold. The traveling distances were hard, and there was a lot of ribs, a lot of animosity, and a lot of breaking in the hard way to the new wrestlers. So can you kind of tell me what your experience was like going there? I'm sure a lot of wrestlers were jealous of you because you were a big bodybuilder, and just what was it like getting to Calgary?
Well, I tell you, once I arrived, and I wasn't aware that the dungeon of Stu Hart was so infamous and yet to become really, really famous. But I thought the training quarters that I was headed for to become a pro wrestler, I thought I was going to walk down into this to the basement of Stu Hart's house. I knew it was Stu Hart that I was going to train me, and see this beautiful gym and everything pristine and training quarters and everything like professional, and I walked into this. We drive up to this mansion, kind of like the Munsters lived in and on television, and it was dark, and there were old cars scattered around the backyard with snow on them and hoods raised up, and it was like a junkyard back there, and it was so eerie, it was so bizarre. And then we knock on the door, and as we're knocking on the door flies open, and 3 or 4 little kids run by us and with no shoes on out in the snow, chasing each other around. And I'm looking, and it's 50 below zero, but I'm saying they're freezing. These little kids are laughing, and they're chasing each other. Stu Hart's kids. And so we go in, and we go downstairs, and Stu Hart, in his street clothes, says, "Very nice to meet you. Let's go downstairs and let's just talk about wrestling. You want to be a wrestler?" And I said, "Yeah, I would like to be a wrestler." And I was not prepared for Stu Hart. I was not warned by my friend who knew about Stu Hart and his tactics. And so the first thing Stu Hart did to me, he noticed the size of my arms, and he started to grab my arms and said, "God, I've never seen arms this size, biceps, and would you throw me a bicep shot? So I gave him a bicep shot and flex for Stu, and he was just so impressed, and he said, let me show you do you mind if I show you a hold? A hold. I thought it was very weird because there was no ring, there were just soiled mats on the floor, just dirty gymnastic gym mats, and we were like in a cellar, and hot water pipes and soiled walls, and very dingy and very dungy looking. No wonder I got the tag, the dungeon. And he said, "Can I show you a hold?" And I thought he was just going to show me a hold. And I said, "Sure, you can show me a hold." I thought it was very bizarre that he wanted to show me a hold without wrestling tights on or gear on. And he said, just let me bend your neck. Let me see your neck. Stick your head down here. So like a fool that I was, I bent over and I stuck my head into Stu Hart's grasp, and he put some sort of I believe later it turned out to be a front face lock, and he began to really tighten up, and I couldn't get out of it. And he laid on me, and I dropped to my knees, and then all the way down, face first, on these dingy, dirty, filthy mats that reeked with odor, and the smell coming up, and he was rubbing my face in this front face lock, and I couldn't get out. There was no way I could get out. I mean, he had this hold locked on me. As strong as I was, it was impossible for me to get out until he decided to release the hold. So I finally released the hold, and I couldn't straighten my neck out for probably an hour. It seemed like an hour, just minutes, but finally I was able to get up to off my prone position, face first, in these filthy, dirty mats. I got up, and I finally stood up and straightened up my neck, and I said, "Okay, that's great. Thanks for the lesson." And I told my friend Bob, I said, I think we should go now. I think we should. I think I've had enough. My first wrestling lesson, this was enough for one night. And then Stu went right back like nothing had happened, right away to my arms again, grabbing my triceps and saying, "God, I've never seen such huge arms. How big are your arms?" And I said, 22 inches. And he said, "How much can you bench press?" And I said, "Probably 600 pounds. And he said, "Can you do it now?" I said, "Not now, not after what you just did to me, but give me a few days to recuperate." So a long story short, I spent about 5 days in the dungeon being mauled by Stu Hart, and then it was time to become an official pro wrestler and get in the ring. And it was Stu Hart's brilliant idea for me to go around this whole entire loop of this territory, of all these towns that made up the Calgary territory, and arm wrestle all challengers, because I was a very good arm wrestler, and I really hadn't been beaten, and I did a lot of arm wrestling in the nightclub. And so I went to all these towns, taking on all comers, arm wrestling, to set up my future wrestling career. And of course, there were just ungodly miles and miles of snow-covered, flat prairie land. And I was just wondering, what am I doing, driving all these endless miles to these cities and these arenas with some not very many people, some packed, and so I endured. I endured.
Back to the arm wrestling for a second. Did you ever have any close calls with fans in the ring?
Oh, never. No, never. Some had thought they were really, and they were probably very good, but I was just so strong, and I knew the techniques of arm wrestling, how to shoot my elbow forward and put the shoulder down, and a lot of tricks of really arm wrestling that these farmers were unaware of. And so even if they were good, they were nearly not my strength and could never come close to beating me whatsoever.
Did you ever sample any of Stu Hart's cooking while you were there?
I didn't actually eat his cooking, even though he was renowned for his meals, but he always brought these boxes of, like, equal to our Safeway stores here in the United States, the big markets full of, and big boxes full of, ripe fruit. He called it food that was ripe fruit, but we called it like fruit that was rotten, and bananas and apples and pears, and he would offer this fruit. He says, take as much as you want, take it home with you, and back to your hotel, and eat all you want. And it it was obviously not good food, and so that was my experience of. But I didn't personally dine at the table of Stu Hart. I didn't want to take that chance.
So at that time, I think you were still going under your real name.
Yes.
And what led to you becoming superstar Billy Graham?
Well, once I left Calgary and came back to Phoenix, and one thing that made me leave Calgary, and I don't know if this has ever been said before, but I made a road trip with a wrestler called Wild Bill Jeromo, who was in the territory at that time. And we were going to a city called Lethbridge. And I was riding with him, and I noticed that on his sun visor and headliner of his car were photographs of his family that he had tacked to his sun visor and kind of pinned to his headliner of his car. And I was riding with him, and I was looking at his family, and I'm saying to myself, and I said, man, what a family you have. You look at your kids and his wife, and he says, yeah, I haven't seen him in a long time. And I said to myself, here I am in the wastelands of Canada, man, freezing, sub-zero, and here's a guy with photographs of his family. I said, do I want to do this for a living? Do I want to be away from what family I have? And all I have of this family are photographs pinned to a sun visor of my car and pinned to the headliner of my car, and there's my family, and here I am out in the wilds of Canada. And that was the deciding thing for me to actually, once it came time for me to leave, I made the decision. That was one of the main reasons I left Calgary and thought that I would probably never wrestle again, because I did not want to end up in a car driving the wastelands of Canada with my family taped and pinned to the sun visors of my car. It's a horribly depressing image.
So that's, of course, when you went back to bouncing at JD's, and you had your first encounter with a very unique character, Dr. Jerry Graham.
Yes, the legendary Dr. Jerry Graham. Went back to bouncing, and lo and behold, one night, Dr. Jerry Graham walks in, and he was a local. We all knew who he was because he had been in a lot of, not only because of his wrestling accomplishments, we knew he was a pro wrestler, but he had always been in fights and had a major problem with alcohol, always drunk, always out of it. And so he said, oh man, Jerry Graham, Dr. Jerry Graham is in the house. And so, long story short, we became friends on his very first visit into the nightclub. And I told him, hey, Dr. Jerry Graham, I just returned from Calgary. I wrestled, Stu Hart trained me. And I said, I don't have anywhere really to wrestle now. I said, I think I'd like to wrestle in a better place than Calgary, a little warmer maybe. And he laughed. He said, well, let's continue your career. And so I actually started training with Dr. Jerry Graham And he said, well, why don't you just become another Graham brother? We'll just make you another brother. We already had Eddie Graham, Luke Graham, and Jerry Graham. And we'll just make you a fourth brother, just like that. I said, really? We can do that? I can just become a brother? I was not fully aware of all the little tricks of pro wrestling. He said, sure, we'll just make you. He said, what name do you want? I said, well, I really like the Reverend Billy Graham, so I'll just become Billy Graham. He said, that's a good name, Billy Graham. He said, okay, you're Billy Graham. You're my youngest brother, Billy Graham. And at the same time, the rock opera Jesus Christ Superstar was out, and a few months into the Billy Graham name, I was listening to Jesus Christ Superstar, the rock opera. I thought, man, that'd be a great name to put before Billy Graham. So I picked up the Superstar part of that rock opera and added that to Billy Graham. I said, this sounds pretty catchy. I think I'll go with this.
So, were you actually the first wrestler to be called Superstar? Did you kind of coin that term?
Yes, and actually, I was one of the first athletes to use the phrase, going back and looking at it. I had some other people do some research on this as well, to really start using the phrase superstar outside of that rock opera in mainstream terminology, and using it as a tag to other sports. And I was really looking back at it, probably one of the very first to ever call themselves a superstar, and it was only because of the rock opera. But that phrase obviously caught on. Now everybody's a
all the
superstar.
wrestlers are superstars.
Yeah, they're superstars now automatically. As soon as you sign your contract, you're a superstar.
You're the original, that's for sure.
Yes.
And one of the first real territories you worked in where you actually had a solid wrestling run working with some of the top names was Mike LaBelle's territory. How did you end up working that?
Well, Jerry Graham, Dr. Jerry Graham, said we need to wrestle somewhere other than a few Indian reservations that we wrestled on around Arizona. And he said, I worked in L.A. a lot. I said, well, why don't you who's the promoter? And he said, Mike LaBelle. I said, why don't you just call him and say, you have a younger brother, can bench press 600 pounds, I can arm wrestle anybody and probably beat him, because I was so confident. And he says, it's a good idea. And I was there when he actually picked up the phone and called Mike LaBelle from Jerry Graham's apartment. And Mike LaBelle said, let me think about it. That was his answer. And I was listening to Jerry Graham talk to Mike LaBelle. And when they hung up, I said, what did he say, brother? He said he needs to think about it. And I said, brother, he doesn't need to think about it, man. I said, I can feel it. That's a stall. I think he's stalling. I was getting pretty smart, not only to business, but very worldly smart. I said, I can smell something funny. I think that's a stall. I said, I think we need to drive over to L.A. and just show up with me in a tank top and walk in that office and say, here we are, Dr. Jerry Graham and his younger brother, Superstar Billy Graham, and still had not bleached my hair blonde yet. He said, that is a great idea. And he says, we got to bleach your hair blonde, and got to redo his hair. His hair wasn't blonde either. And so we brought out the bleached our hair blonde, and drove directly to Los Angeles from Phoenix, got a hotel, Santa Monica. The next morning, walked into that office, and Fred Blassie was the head booker with Charlie Moto, a Japanese fellow, and Mike LaBelle in the office, and we walked in, and their jaws dropped when they saw Dr. Jerry Graham. And Freddie Blassie hated Jerry Graham with a passion. I don't know why.
Because he had an
alcoholic and everything, and all of his problems and stuff. And they literally, jaws hit the ground, and the first words out of Mike LaBelle's mouth to us, to Jerry Graham actually, was, I thought I told you we'd think about it and we would call you. And then I said, I could feel the tension. Immediately I could feel the tension. I said, well, I just thought it'd be better if we came over and you could take a look at me and this right here nobody has. I was an instant promo. I just started cutting a promo instantly, and I said, nobody can beat me in arm wrestling. And I can go on your television and accept all challengers. And I said, we will get over. I cut a promo, an instant promo, just came out of nowhere automatically, and Michael Bell and they all, and Freddie Blassie kind of paid attention, and they said, well, that may not be a bad idea. And so they're taking a look at me, and I said, because they were thinking beyond Jerry Graham and really maybe superstar Billy Graham. So they actually took us, and they said, okay, we're going to give you a chance. But they warned Jerry Graham. They warned him. They said, if you screw up one time, in other words, if you get drunk and you can't perform one time, you, pointing to me, are fired. I said, well, why should I be fired? I don't even drink. Yes, what? He said, well, you're a tag team. We're going to make you a tag team. And if he goes, you go. So, in other words, I got to be a babysitter. Exact words I told Michael Bell. He said, that's right. You got to babysit Dr. Jerry Graham if you want this thing to work. So that's what I did. I had to babysit him.
And how was your success there in a nutshell? It was a pretty popular territory at the time. There was very good crowds at the Olympics for the bigger events. So how do you feel your run was there?
It was very good. And Jerry Graham lasted about 2 weeks and abstained from drinking. And then one night decided to get some drinks, alcohol, get a six-pack on the way back into town, and got drunk. And I let him out of the hotel that we were staying at, and he proceeded to go on downtown Los Angeles to get drunker and drunker, and got arrested and thrown in jail. And so that, of course, got back to Michael Bell. We had a phone call the next morning. I did, to come to the office immediately. And Jerry Graham was still in jail, so they had to bail him out. And they said, you're fired. We give you 2 weeks notice right now. You're gone. I said, wait a minute. I didn't do anything. I don't drink. I don't even drink. And I said, I would like to stay. I would like to stay. I don't drink. I said, I'm not a problem. I said, and I distanced myself from Dr. Jerry Graham. And they said, well, Michael Bell said, well, let me think about it. But they did give Jerry Graham, and the next 2 weeks was hell on earth, because he drank every night after every match and got so drunk and so far out there that I had to drag him out of these bars and nightclubs on the way back to Los Angeles. And it was hell for us, hell for me, because I wasn't even a drinker. I didn't even drink. And I had to babysit him literally. And President Nixon was the president at the time, Richard Nixon, living in San Clemente, California. And on the way back from San Diego, we stopped in San Clemente so Dr. Jerry could get a couple six-packs to drink on the way back up to Los Angeles. And he just decided to go inside the bar. And I said, man, are we going to spend the night in San Clemente? We're only 70 miles from L.A. And he started drinking and drinking. We got a room. And he got so drunk, and this is the home away from the White House of President Richard Nixon, and so full of secret security, secret security people. He got so drunk and so out of control. Finally came back to my room about 2 o'clock in the morning, after causing havoc at the bar, and got in the room. And the next thing, red lights everywhere, beating on the door, Secret Service. This guy, the President of the United States, lives here. This is a summer retreat. This guy is a maniac. He's drunk. He's beating people up. He's destroying things. And I said, look, man, you can tell I'm not drunk. I don't even drink. They said, yeah, but you're with him. I said, well, look, why don't we do this? Let me get him out of town. I said, instead of throwing us both in jail, because they said, you're going to jail, both of you right now. You can't do this in the home of the President of the United States of America. You can't act like this. You can't get away with this, because he was wild when he was drunk. So I said, I'll get him out of town. We'll leave right now. They said, get him in the car. We want to see it, man. I got our stuff together, threw him in the car, and drove to Los Angeles. And then, thank God, the 2 weeks was up. But a horrible thing, I'll throw this story in, because it was outside of wrestling. A horrible incident happened right here in Phoenix with Jerry Graham when his mother died, and she owned a lot of land up in North Phoenix. It was worth a lot of money, $500,000 back then in the 60s. That was probably like $1 billion today, maybe, who knows? A lot of money. She owned a lot of land, and she died in the hospital. And Jerry Graham, Dr. Jerry Graham, went into the hospital here in Phoenix. This was before I became a wrestler. This happened about a year before I met him. Went into the hospital with a pistol, with a gun, and pulled it on the doctors and said, I want my mother. I want to get my mother out of here. And they said, sir, your mother has passed away. She's dead. And he says, yeah, I know, but I still want her. He walked into the room where they had her. He said, take me to her. They did. Of course, they had a gun. Jerry Graham had a gun on the doctors. Took his mother, threw her over his shoulder. Dead, deceased mother. Carried her out to his car. Put her in the front seat of his car. And drove away with his mother. And so, of course, they called the police. You pull a gun on a doctor in the hospital, my God. And so the police just followed him and finally slowed him down and finally cornered him, and were able to talk him out of releasing his mother and getting his poor deceased mother back to the hospital, and arrested him. And then it came to realize that once the paperwork came from his mother that all the land that she owned, she didn't leave any to him. She left it to some charity, about $500,000 worth of land. And it went to a charity, and then he really, really went off the deep end and started drinking heavier. If you could drink heavier, he did. If it was possible, he did, because he didn't get any of the inheritance. But yet...
And he had been taking care of her a good
Yeah.
amount and sending her money, hadn't he? All right, so then your LA stuff kind of ended, and you ended up working for Roy Shear. You want to just summarize your experience working with Roy Shear?
Roy Shires.
Or Shire, yeah.
Yeah, Roy Shires in the San Francisco territory. They had heard about me and flew me up for a tryout match. And I had a tryout match, and Roy Shires liked me, liked what he saw, and told Mike LaBelle I'd like to use Billy Graham. And they traded talent back and forth all the time. So they made me Pat Patterson's tag team partner, and I became, which was amazing, that with my little bit of experience, still very green in the business, in technical wrestling, I became a tag team partner to Pat Patterson, wrestling against people like Ray Stevens and Peter Maeva and
You want to just tell people quickly just how over Pat Patterson and Ray Stevens were?
Well, they were household names in San Francisco Bay Area. They were literally, Ray Stevens and Pat Patterson, pro wrestling was so over at that period of time that they were literally household names. And they were as best as you could possibly be in professional wrestling. And it was very amazing that Roy Shires had really stressed in his wrestling presentation to me that is all psychology. You have to have three things to make up a match. You have to have technical wrestling. You have to have brute force like street fighting, and you have to have your amateur wrestling, your brute force, and then high spots. Three things make up a wrestling match, and he stressed those three things. And he says, you go out, and when you're not wrestling, you, Billy Graham, watch every match on that card until it's your time to wrestle. And then when you come back, you watch the rest of the matches. So he was very dictator, like a dictator. But it was very, very wise because I learned a lot from watching.
So in these days, you were in the main events for the first time, and
Yes.
they would use blood a lot in the main events. And can you kind of just tell me your first experience with blading and how blading in wrestling was treated at the time? Were the blades that were used sanitary often, or would people reuse them?
Well, my very first blade job was done on an Indian reservation in Arizona, wrestling with Dr. Jerry Graham, and because he said we'll promote some shows on the Indian reservations, and his very quote, he says the Indians are easy. He says all you gotta do is have a couple matches, have like 6 guys, two single matches and a tag match, and three or 4 matches, and give them a little juice, a little blood, and he says they'll go home happy. He says it's easy to make the Indians happy, and so he showed me how to make a blade, and I made this razor blade thing, and it was like I was kind of like, my God, are you serious? You're gonna cut your head? This is my first experience about blading, and he says, yeah, you just tape here. I'll show you how to make it. He helped me make a blade and left the tip exposed, and I taped it to my finger. And then he says, and you put a little piece of tape over the edge of the blade that's exposed, and when it's time to cut your head, you just simply unwind the piece of tape or pull it loose and then cut your head. And you always put your left hand, your left forearm up above where you're going to cut so you can seal the actual cutting. Very precise, very smooth at it. And so I cut myself on the Indian reservation, and I thought I was pouring torrents of blood, and actually it was barely dribbling down my forehead. And as I was walking back to the ring, I thought for sure when I looked in the mirror I would see a mass of blood dripping to the floor, and it was just a trickle because I was kind of afraid to cut my head with a razor blade. It was kind of like, are you serious? And Dr. Jerry Graham kind of shuffled through. I had gotten blades, brand new razor blades, but he had just kind of shuffled through his bag and found a blade for him to use on himself. He was not concerned about sanitary conditions. So that was my really first experience.
In those days, would any disease from blading, would that even have been an issue?
Oh, no. There was no concern whatsoever. And Roy Shires, the blading in the San Francisco territory, Roy Shires, there was a lot of blading going on, and he said it's simple. You cut your head here one night in Fresno, next night you wrestle Modesto, you gotta get juice again. You cut your head over here. He said you cut your head in a different spot every night. He said then the other place will heal up if you have to get juice every night. He just cut yourself in a different place. It was just very, very, very simple, And I said, well, okay. So I did.
So that's where you really made a name for yourself, and would you say you were kind of a main event star from that point on in your career?
Yes, that confirmed my position as a main event wrestler, and the timing was so perfect. At the 1 year, I had a 1 year run in San Francisco, and at the end of that run, Ray Stevens left San Francisco and went to Minneapolis to wrestle in Minneapolis, the AWA, and I left and went back down to Los Angeles for another run in Los Angeles. And Ray Stevens gave me a phone call from Minneapolis one day and said, Superstar. By then I picked up the name Superstar because of the rock opera. And he said, Superstar, he says, why don't you come up here to Minneapolis? You can make some real money in Minneapolis. It's a huge territory with big cities, man. And he says, you're good enough. He says, you'll make it. He says, I'm going to personally endorse you. So I said, man, that's great. That's fantastic. So I got a personal endorsement from Ray Stevens, left Los Angeles, drove to Minneapolis, and started wrestling in the AWA.
And before we move on too much to the AWA, Pat Patterson, I guess you were kind of a protege as
Oh,
he is
yes.
in Roy Shire's territory.
Yes.
What is your opinion overall at this point in your career? What's your overall opinion of Pat Patterson on how he helped you? And,
Oh, he was like a teacher. He was invaluable. As a matter of fact, all of them, including Ray Stevens and Peter Maiva, all of them were so gracious. And Patterson and Patterson was the one who taught me how to blade. Really blade and conceal the blading, and would watch me and said, "Oh, you did a good job," and was very, very helpful. I mean, coaching me all the way along, every step of the way, and that experience, being with the elite professionals, was really amazing. That I had that opportunity to prepare me to become what I became in the AWA.
just finally on Pat Patterson, he's ended up doing excellent in the wrestling business since working for Shire, and he's been one of Vince McMahon's right-hand man for years. He still is to this day, works for WWE and was there, I believe, since the 80s, working alongside Vince as an agent and a producer for WWF and then WWE. What do you think of his mind for the wrestling business?
Oh, there's no question. He's a genius. And all the years that he spent underneath Roy Shires, and then being a tag team partner and then an opponent with Ray Stevens, their mindset was so far above everyone else's. And then Pat just evolved into this genius of the business. Really, I don't think there's anybody that can compare to him as far as psychology and what to do and how to do it and when to do it, and to actually the nuts and bolts of how to succeed in the business. I don't think there's anybody any better than Pat Patterson.
So as you were saying, Ray Stevens brought you to the AWA. Would you say the AWA was probably the biggest territory at the time in the United States, covering the most area?
Oh yes. I was amazed that Minneapolis being the home base, and they actually had Denver, Colorado as part of their territory. Winnipeg, Canada as part of their territory. Chicago, co-promotion with the Bruiser, part of their territory. All the way down to Nebraska, Fargo, North Dakota. My God, it was so spread out. It was just phenomenal. And it was probably the most successful territory because of the immense size and the large cities, that it was just, and once I got over, which was very, very quickly I got over, I started flying, because there were trips 400 miles one way from Minneapolis to Fargo, North Dakota. I just couldn't do that and still train and maintain a physique that I wanted to maintain. I just couldn't do those hours, so I just started flying to all the cities that I could fly to, and it was a tax write-off anyway, part of your write-off.
Were you paid well in those days?
Yes. Vern Gagne paid exceptionally well and was known for his payoffs. He was known to take care of his wrestlers, and he paid exceptionally well. And really, it was compared to other territories, there was no question that he was probably the best payoff man in professional wrestling at that time.
So,
very generous.
Of course, Vern Gagne was the owner and one of the big stars of the AWA.
I wouldn't call him a star.
No.
I personally would not call Vern Gagne, no personal offense to Vern Gagne or his family, son Greg, whom I think the world of, but I would have not called Vern Gagne a star when you had a Ray Stevens there and people like that, Nick Bockwinkel and the Crusher. The Crusher was a star. The Crusher mesmerized people. Okay, I would just not call him a star in that sense of the word. I would call him over, yes, respected, yes. I respected the man. You know, everybody respected the man, and he was an excellent wrestler, but I would not consider him a star. I just wouldn't.
So you don't think he was one of the main actual draws?
No, I do not believe that if it was up to him to draw all the houses and all the money, it would have never been the success it was. Never. If he would have been the sole money drawer of that territory. The Von Raschkes, Ray Stevens, the Crushers, the Bruisers coming into Chicago, places like that, never. Not on his own. Wahoo McDaniel and myself, people like that, no, never.
And you did have some matches with Vern during your stay in the AWA.
Yes. Horrible matches, in my opinion. He was such a technical wrestler, and that was a great thing. I mean, I think he went to the Olympics. I don't know. You may know. You're a historian of wrestling, but I found that his style of wrestling did not fit my style of wrestling compared to a Wahoo McDaniel, for instance, a wild Indian type character who was a fighter and a brawler, and who he and I personally set attendance records in many venues across that territory after we did an arm wrestling angle on television. And Wahoo put my arm down, I picked up the table, crushed him over the head with the table, and he bladed, and we did the angle, and that thing was so hot. We got the first sellout in Green Bay, Wisconsin, 12,000 people in Green Bay, Wisconsin to see me and Wahoo wrestle each other. That was the hottest angle ever in that territory. And Vern Gagne could have never done it.
Now, Wahoo was a very intense wrestler. What was it like wrestling him?
Yes.
It's kind of not the style you're used to.
Wrestling with Wahoo was a pleasure. And it was a nightmare wrestling Vern Gagne because of Vern's technical skills, insisting on wrestling technically. But then you had Wahoo McDaniel, who was a fighter and a brawler and a wild, basically Indian type image that they gave him, and who would fight tooth and nail and bite and claw if he had to. In the mat, and hit you with chairs and choke you with microphone cords and kick and stomp and fight, which was my style and which made us just blend and just gel so perfectly compared to a Vern Gagne technical skill that just completely threw me off, and I regretted every time I was booked, which wasn't very often because our matches just didn't work and people didn't enjoy the matches.
And another amateur wrestler in the AWA that you had matches with was Mad Dog Vachon. He was very over in that territory.
Yes.
What are some of your memories of him as a person and of your actual matches with him?
We had a match. It was a rare tag match. It was a rare tag match. My tag team partner was Ivan Koloff, Russian Bear. Ivan Koloff, who was extremely over as a heel, against Mad Dog Vachon and the Crusher in Milwaukee. And that was a real Mad Dog Vachon teaming with the Crusher in Milwaukee against superstar Billy Graham and Ivan Koloff, set an all-time attendance record for that building in a cage match. And so, of course, that was just complete chaos, fighting, biting. There was no wrestling. You could take wrestling down off the marquee and just put street fight, because that's what it basically was. And that's what his style was also. I didn't have that many matches with Mad Dog because he was a heel, and I was a heel. But the few matches I did have with him was at least I was able to fight and be more aggressive with my style of wrestling as opposed to having to wrestle somebody with technical skills.
And Mad Dog's also kind of legendary outside of the ring for his brawls that he's gotten into. Have you ever witnessed any?
I never witnessed anything of Mad Dog. I heard a lot of stories, but I never saw him in action.
What about the infamous plane incident? Did you ever hear that story?
Yes, I was in the territory when he opened the door. Is that the story you're talking about?
Could you tell us that story?
Well, I believe the story. They had hired a private airplane go to a town and get back to Minneapolis. And Mad Dog, Ivan Putski, I think, was on that flight. Somebody else.
I believe.
Who?
Was Jesse on that flight?
I don't know if Dusty might have been. Baron von Raschke, maybe. A lot of the top people were on the flight. And Mad Dog Vachon opens the door in mid-flight of a private airplane and kicks open the door. And it's a twin-engine private plane, and is completely drunk and just out of control, and unhatches the door latch and kicked it open in flight, 15,000 feet in a private airplane. And of course, it put everybody's lives at risk. And I tell you, if I would have been on that flight, once we landed, it would have been the end of Mad Dog his career, because it would have put my life, everybody's life was really in jeopardy. And that was a foolish, insane thing to do. It was just stupidity.
What was the wrestlers' reaction?
Oh, they all were. Well, first of all, they were petrified that the plane would go out of control because the doors open, throws off the equilibrium of the air pressure inside the airplane, and that they were going to crash. And so they were somehow able to pull Mad Dog back away from the door, and then pull the door back up and relatch it. And everybody was ultra mad and hot and just.
So you became good friends with Dusty Rhodes eventually. Did you first meet him in the AWA, or would it have been in Florida?
AWA. We first met in the AWA, became instant friends in the AWA, and
What bonded you two together?
I think it was our promo style. We both enjoyed our promos, and we had a lot. Our promos were almost identical, a lot of them, and they were we had a lot of fun with our promos, and he was just a lot of fun to be around. And eventually, when we started wrestling against each other, we drew instantly. Immediately, we were a draw because of our promo skills. But in Minneapolis, we were both heels, and then eventually we shot an angle towards the end of it where we brought him in as a babyface and turned against me. I turned against him.
And I believe Dusty was partners with Dick Murdoch around that time. Do you
Yes.
have any memories of him?
Yeah, Dick Murdoch didn't impress me. A very nice guy, but very redneck type of an individual, for real. I think that was his real personality. And as a matter of fact, in a restaurant, I was riding with Ray Stevens and Dick Murdoch and somebody else to a town, and we stopped in a little city to eat lunch on the way to this town, and Dick Murdoch made a racial comment to the waitress, and Ray Stevens lost it and really jumped all over Murdoch and read him the riot act and said, "Don't you ever talk like that to a young lady." I guess she was a black young lady, or maybe Puerto Rican or something, a different nationality, and he completely put her down because of her nationality, and that just.
So you didn't have the bond, obviously, with Murdoch that you did.
Oh, no, zero bond. No, zero. I didn't even like him.
So you want to go into some of the matches you had in the AWA and possibly in.
Oh, some of the matches I had, the greatest matches were with Wahoo McDaniel.
Okay.
Oh yeah, that was just bar none, because they were so, the angle was over so strong, the arm wrestling angle, it was over so strong, and my promos were so strong, and Wahoo's energy level and his and the intensity, and it was just such a natural, and everything selling out and setting records, and his style of wrestling. You know, like I said, you go back and look at still photos, you know, of choking with microphone cords and kicking and stomping, and very, very rough style. Those were my favorite matches, really.
So you were going into Florida somewhere after AWA?
Yes. Yes. When Dusty had left, gone to Florida, and then I left, gone back to Los Angeles for a short period of time, and had called Dusty. Dusty became the booker by now in Florida, and I said, man, I need to get out of here, and I'd like to come to Florida. He says, come on, brother, and went to Florida, and immediately got over in Florida, in Tampa, and it was really a pleasure. You know, it was so well organized, the territory, and with the television production and the fans. I mean, the territory itself was just on fire. You know.
And you actually met a young Hulk Hogan when you were in that territory a few times. Do you have any recollection of that, both in the gym?
Oh, I remember the first night I met Hulk Hogan. It was in a local nightclub that all the wrestlers visited after we had our Tuesday night matches in Tampa. We'd go to the Imperial Club, still embedded in my mind, the name of the place, and after the matches in Tampa, and then and one night in walks Hulk Hogan, the future Hulk Hogan, Terry Bollea, and a guy that's 6'6" or 7 or whatever he was, and with his huge head, and he comes up to me, and he says, "Superstar Billy Graham," he said, "I want to ask you 2 questions. I want to ask you two questions." I said, "Who are you, brother?" Because I didn't mind. I knew he was going to be a wrestler, or it was going to be something to do with wrestling. I said, "Who are you, brother? What are you doing?" He said, my name, but I don't even know what his name, his wrestling wanted to be name was, because he hadn't wrestled yet. Maybe he told me his name was Terry Bollea. He said, "I'm local. I want to be a wrestler. They won't let me in. They won't give me a tryout," he said. "For some reason, they won't give me a tryout." He said, "I want to ask you 2 questions in this nightclub." I said, "Well, sit down, brother. Sit down. Ask me the questions." He was very polite, very nice. He said, "I want to know 2 things. How do I become a professional wrestler, and how do I take steroids?" I said, "Well, taking steroids is easy. You just take a shot every day, all day. take steroids every day, all day." And I was kind of laughing as I was saying it as a joke. And he said, "Well, I've been doing that for the last year. I've been giving myself a shot of testosterone almost every day on I believe he said my right hip." And he said, "For the last year," and he said, "I've built up so much scar tissue that I have scar tissue about the size of a golf ball on my hip." I said, "Well, brother, just change hips. Go to the other hip." I said, "Switch sides for a while, and then go to your thigh, and then go to your other thigh, and then go to your shoulder, and then go to your other deltoid, and move it around." I said, "But just take a lot of steroids, you know." And I said, eventually, I said, "The way you look, as big as you are," and I had seen him sitting about 7 rows back in the Tampa Armory with that big, giant head, a full head above everybody else's head, just absolutely laser beamed onto the ring, watching the matches and watching me, and I'd seen him maybe 6 weeks worth every Tuesday night, and so finally when we did meet, I knew he really wanted it bad. I said, "They will let you in." I said, "They're messing with you." And the Florida territory was famous for messing with guys, and for there was a Japanese wrestler there, Hiro Matsuda maybe was the name, possibly, that was a very good amateur wrestler, and before they allowed you to become a professional wrestler, if you weren't someone like myself with already an established reputation, they would take you down to the Tampa, their little sportatorium deal there, and put you in the ring and seriously do some damage to you amateur-wise, and see if you wanted to still become a professional wrestler. And he said, "They won't even." I said, "Brother, they're going to maybe take you down there and try to do some damage to you." He said, "I don't care what they want to do to me. I want to be a pro wrestler." I said, "Well, you will be. I can see it. You're huge. You're big. You got it in you. Just keep on trying. Don't give up." That's the only advice I gave him. I said, "Keep on trying and don't give up." And so, sure enough, obviously, he became Hulk Hogan.
So he had already been taking steroids before he ever got into the pro wrestling?
Oh, he told me he'd been taking steroids for 1 full year at the time I met him. And I had been taking steroids for 5 years before I started wrestling in mid-60s. So there was nothing wrong with that.
You want to get back, I forgot to ask you about this at the time, but how you were introduced to steroids?
Oh, it was just during my powerlifting years in Phoenix. Everybody was taking steroids during my bouncing years.
They were legal?
Yeah, totally legal.
Nobody knew the side effects.
And we read about side effects but didn't care about it. Just blew through the side effects. And they were totally legal. Doctors would give them out prescriptions, and there was no problem getting steroids. Totally legal. And it was like a wonder drug. It made you feel incredible. It made you strong. I came, right up there, benching 600 pounds, one of the few guys in the country at the time that was doing that. So I became exceptionally strong,
And you even trained with Arnold for a while. Can you kind of tell us what years
Oh.
were and how it came about?
Arnold, met Arnold in 1969, 1 week after he came to this country. And it was kind of ironic because it was after his first defeat in a physique contest against Frank Zane in Miami Beach, Florida, that he lost to Frank Zane. And then came into Joe Gold brought him into Santa Monica, and I met him on his first night in Los Angeles with Dave Draper, Peanuts West, and a few other guys, and
Because you were training at Gold's.
I was training at Gold's, the first and original Gold's gym, and met Arnold.
Kind of gravitate to you because you were one of the biggest in the gym.
Yes, it was funny because I had really had gotten huge, and he had this natural charisma that we started taking photos right away because he had a photographer with him, Art Zeller, one of the early legendary, iconic photographers of bodybuilding. And so we started taking photos together of our first meeting, and he was very animated and very excited and very happy and very thrilled to meet me and over the size of my arms, and so it was really a great meeting, and fortunately I still have those photographs, the original photos of that first meeting ever in 1969 of Arnold Schwarzenegger being in this country for 1 week. It's really amazing.
So, and you ended up becoming friends with him for a while, didn't you?
Oh yes, I trained with Arnold for years after that, and then I became the pro wrestler that I did. And every time I came back into Los Angeles, I would go to Gold's and train with Arnold. So, and actually took Arnold to the matches several times.
What was it like working out with Arnold?
Oh, Arnold was so driven. Arnold Schwarzenegger was so driven, so focused on bodybuilding that it was all mental. The drive that he had and the focus that he had was beyond anything or anybody I had ever seen. I had trained hard, but nothing compared to the dedication that Arnold had. I had never seen that before in my life. And I was just really impressed, and even more impressed when he told me he was going to be a movie star. I said, Arnold, you're going to be a movie star? He told me this early on. I'm going to be a movie star. And I said, you can't even speak English, Arnold. And he had a hard time with English. And I said, I'll get by it. I'll be a movie star. You're not going to be a movie star. You can't even speak English. And I actually helped Arnold enroll in Santa Monica Community College. And it was really funny because he was having a hard time with English. And I just constantly ribbed him about that, joked him about that. But he learned enough English to become a movie star.
What was his reaction to watching you wrestle?
Oh, he was thrilled by it. He loved it. He really enjoyed it. And I got a special photo of him trying to put an arm bar on me. It's really kind of a funny photo. But he really enjoyed the wrestling. Really enjoyed it.
Did he ever consider maybe having a match or two, since wrestling was popular in LA at the time? And
No. He never considered pro wrestling for an instant. It was always the movies. I'm going to be a movie star. I'm going to be in the movies. And that was it.
And he is actually the godfather of your daughter.
Yes.
How did that come about?
Well, my daughter was born in 1972 in Santa Monica, Capella, and I asked Arnold to be the godfather to my daughter, and he said absolutely, and he was thrilled to be, and it's a very simple thing, and so and being European, I think they have a little different take on being a godfather or something along those lines. They take it very seriously, and he was always very faithful. He called my daughter and stayed in touch with her, was very proud to have been close to my daughter that he was, so that was very nice of him, very nice.
Interesting. And do you have any, what's your favorite story between you and Arnold of your friendship with him over the years?
Oh, there were so many. Being around him was just amazing because some of that focus and drive rubbed off on me. And I'll never forget one day it was wrestling in that Los Angeles territory was a dream because you had time to train, you had time to lay in the sun, and then you had time to drive to your town, which was San Diego, or over to Bakersfield, somewhere nearby. And one day, after laying in the sun, after working out, laying in the sun, eating lunch, then laying in the sun, getting up, walking to the water to cool off, jump in the surf, and then come back and lay down and get some more sun. I was about 10 feet behind Arnold. I was looking down at his calves, and I said, Arnold, your calves are so big. He had enormous calves. I said, they're so big, it makes your knees look insignificant. And he stopped and turned around and said, what does insignificant mean? He didn't know what the word insignificant meant. And so that shows you how far back and how raw he was, that not even knowing the meaning of that. I said, don't worry about it. You got huge calves, Arnold. They look great.
So now getting back to Florida, you feuded with Dusty some more, and you worked for Eddie Graham, who was another kind of thought of as a wrestling genius,
Yeah.
like Roy Shar. What's your opinion of Eddie as a promoter and his booking style?
Yes, he was very, his finishes, he was very, very detailed in his finishes, almost like a Roy Shires was also very detailed in his finishes, and it was really a kayfabe. It was really protecting the business at all times during that period of time, and Eddie Graham was a master of that, and his knowledge and his approach to professional wrestling was perfect, and his personal reputation in Tampa was impeccable. He was like almost godlike in Tampa, and well loved by all the citizens of Tampa and of course of Florida, and so it was quite shocking when he unfortunately committed suicide.
And what do you think led him to do it? There's been lots of theories out there. I guess everyone has their own opinion.
There's several theories going around, and one theory was that actually another wrestler, who I won't mention his name, was involved in, and it was real estate development, and they were in the process of, they got some sort of an inside tip that a big freeway was going to be going through, and so they were buying real estate up and doing something illegally with the real estate, and he had got caught at it, and he didn't want to be exposed to the citizens of Tampa and of Florida that he was been caught illegally in some sort of a fraud with real estate, and that because his reputation was impeccable and he was so highly respected, I think that was one of the major theories, that he just couldn't face, because he was certainly going to prison for this offense, if this was the actual offense. So that was one of the major theories that was out there, that he just was not going to go to prison.
So during the time you were in AWA, you were wrestling in Florida, doing tours kind of everywhere, and you were in Houston, which was a popular territory at the time run by Paul Bosch. Do you have any memories of that?
Yes, Paul Bosch was probably one of the most respected promoters in all of wrestling because he was probably the best payoff man in wrestling. And he was very, very, very professional in his programs, in his promotions. So well respected in the city of Houston, and his shows were ran like clockwork. And he was able to bring in talent that was not necessarily booked in the overall Texas territory, that part of the territory from Dallas and Austin and San Antonio and Houston, and he was able to bring in people like Ernie Ladd and Bruiser Brody and big high-profile names that would come in for a shot or two and then leave. And so he was extremely successful, and wrestling in Houston was an absolute pleasure because of the professionalism of the promoter, Paul Bosch.
And you actually had a match with Bruiser Brody.
Oh, yeah.
Once. What's your memories of that match?
Bruiser Brody, really, that was a good name for him. We really bonded for some reason, even though I think we just wrestled each other that one time. I've been racking my brain, and I can't remember another match, maybe another match somewhere, but this one match in Houston, Texas, the main event against Bruiser Brody was an amazing experience for me because it was the first time I felt like it was really my style for sure, because it was beyond my style. He was so aggressive and so so hardcore with chairs and with throwing you into walls, into doors, and it was the first time I actually felt like a little kid being led around an arena, and we had a great match, and what made it great was when it came time for him to do the honors for me and sell for me, he was right there, and I was able to. I was the heel, he was the baby face, and I was able to get some heat on him in exchange for him beating the crap out of me for 20 minutes. And so it evened out, and then we had a great finish, and neither one of us were hurt, and the people were happy, and everybody went home celebrating.
And what did you think of him as a person? You said you two were close.
Oh, I thought he was a fantastic guy. Very wise. He was so wise in wrestling. He seemed to have this understanding of the business and his place in the business that very few wrestlers had, and he took advantage of it. And he knew that he was a draw, and he knew that he was in demand, and he took advantage of that. And he was very wise with his money and very frugal and very. I got along perfect with him outside the ring. Matter of fact, he went to Mass every Sunday. If he wasn't in the ring and he had time, he would definitely go to a Catholic Mass. And so very few people know that side of the story of Bruiser Brody.
And
Very dedicated.
What was your reaction when you heard he was killed in the dressing room by Jose Gonzalez in Bayamon, Puerto Rico in 19?
My reaction was horror and disbelief, and that he was brutally murdered by a person in Puerto Rico in a wrestling shower stall in some arena in Puerto Rico with a large knife, I believe, and just butchered like some animal with rabies or something that you want to discard. It was just horrifying to know that he was actually murdered. The man was murdered, and I was just horrified by it. I still am to this day that it actually happened. That I don't believe to this day there's been a conviction in that case.
No, he was acquitted. Are you?
The murderer was acquitted.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because there wasn't enough people testifying.
Witnesses to testify against him.
What do you think about that murderer still being honored as a legend in Puerto Rico?
Oh, I think it's the most perverse thing that could possibly happen. I mean, how perverse is that to honor a murderer, to hold him in high esteem, and to, who obviously killed another human being so grossly and by stabbing them to death and slicing them, and still to be held in high esteem is in his country is beyond it's disgusting.
So tell us about going to the New York territory for the first time. How did that come about?
I got a phone call from Vince McMahon Sr. And I was at my friend's gym in Phoenix, and right before I went to Florida, and to wrestle for Dusty and Eddie Graham, and Vince McMahon Sr. said, "This is Vince Sr., Vince McMahon Sr., Motor, New York." He said, "Superstar, I'd like you to come and wrestle for me." I said, "Well, that'd be fantastic. I'd love to come and wrestle for you in New York." I said, "But I'm committed to go to Florida right now. I just committed to go down and wrestle for Dusty and Eddie Graham." And so I said, as soon as I'm through with these folks in Florida, I'd be thrilled. I'd be honored to go to New York. I knew nothing about the New York territory, except that I had, of course, seen all the wrestling magazines, and they featured New York wrestling because that's where all the photographers were basically out of New York. And so their photos were from the Garden and on the cover of the wrestling magazine. And so I thought it would be a fantastic thing, but knew nothing of the actual territory itself, except that it was Madison Square Garden, it was New York, and it was Philadelphia, and it was Boston, and it was the Northeast.
Really, the most known wrestlers in North America at that time would have been the ones wrestling in the New York territory, would you say?
Oh, by far, because of the magazine coverage. All the magazine people, we call them the after mags, was the nickname for them. All the magazine, all the photographers were out of New York, Madison Square Garden, so all the coverage came from New York City.
So what were you told when you were being brought in? Basically, did you know that you were going to get a good spot?
Oh, yes. Immediately I was told, a senior told me, "I'm bringing you in to work with Bruno, on top." And
tell us a bit about what Bruno was like in those days.
Oh, Bruno was like a really, like a living god to the wrestling fans. He was so admired and so idolized. If the term idolized ever would be applicable, it's here. The fans idolized Bruno Sammartino. He was like an idol to them. He could do no wrong. And he basically did no wrong. He drank a little wine with his dinner, and that was it. He never was out on the town. He was never getting drunk. He was never riding. He was never doing things that a lot of wrestlers had done. He was a gentleman, and people respected him, and they idolized him. And I thought, man, this is going to be fantastic, because I had seen Bruno in all the magazines, and he said, "I'm going to bring you in to work with Bruno," And I said, "Well, this is going to be great." And so when I finally met him and realized how extremely how mesmerizing he was to the people just idolized him. I had never seen anything like that in my life. I'd never seen anything like that in my life.
So how did they bring you into the territory? What was, did they give you a series of...
Well, the way they brought me in was to do their TV. They did three weeks of television at one taping. And so you did 3 matches and at one evening, and they would spread them out in 3 weeks. And so every 3 weeks you do your taping. And it was kind of a shock at first, because Vince Sr. said, "I'm going to put you with the Wizard. The Wizard's going to be your manager." And I really never had a manager at that time ever. Bobby Heenan had did just a little bit of stuff in Milwaukee and around Chicago with me, but not really as my actual manager, so I never had a real manager. I'll never forget that. And I said, but Vince, I said, I don't need a manager. I said, I can talk for myself. You know, I said, I can talk for myself. I can get myself over. And he said, Billy, he says, I know. He says, don't worry about it. He says, I'm going to put you with the Wiz, the Grand Wizard. He said, he's a great mouthpiece. The exact words from Vince McMahon Sr. He's a great mouthpiece. And that's what I said, but I can talk too. I can talk for myself. I said, I don't need a great mouthpiece. And it was an actual issue. And I said, I really don't want anybody talking for me. I said, I can talk. I can cut a promo, Vince. You know I can. That's why I'm here. And he said, Billy, please. He says, trust me. Vince McMahon Sr. was very smooth and very accommodating and very persuasive and very kind and gentle spirit, a very gentle spirit. And he just patted me on the shoulder and I'll never forget it. He says, just trust me. Just give me he's telling me to trust him, the promoter. Just give me a chance, and he's the promoter. I said, okay, I believe you. I'll believe you. It was very funny for the promoter telling you, just trust me. Just give me a chance. Let's just, okay. And so I decided after, because I'd seen the Grand Wizard in the magazine, so I knew his little gimmick and his little stuff, and I said, you know what? I thought about it. And after talking to Vince Sr., I said, and I looked at the Wizard, I said, I think I can make this thing work for me. I think I can make the Grand Wizard work for me. And so my idea was to have the Grand Wizard start combing my hair, taking my shirts off, trying to pull it down over my biceps, and being almost my personal valet. And so, sure enough, it worked. It worked perfectly. And so I've got to applaud Vince Sr., and he also has to applaud me because I almost walked. I came very close to turning around and saying, I don't want a manager, because I was really cutting good promos by then. You know, I learned a lot from Dusty, by the way. I just came from working with Dusty. We were both cutting these promos against each other, and so we were at a very high level. And I after the talk with Vince saying, please just give me a chance, just trust me. So I said, okay, I'll trust you. And so sure enough, I figured it out, and I committed myself to making it work and came up with all those crazy Grand Wizard stuff, which are now legendary photos of him pulling my shirt off and combing my hair and taking my sunglasses off and being a real valet type. It was actually an asset to my persona.
And how did you find out you were going to become the champion of the territory and actually defeat Bruno Sammartino, who was such an iconic figure?
Well, after that 1975 first run for about a year, I guess it was, maybe a year and a half, then I went back to Phoenix and had a kind of a hiatus period. I got another phone call from Vince at the gym I was training at. He said, Billy, good to talk to you again. He said, this is Vince Sr. I said, Vince, good to hear your voice again. What's going on? What's happening? He says, listen, Bruno's tired. Bruno's worn out. The wrestling rings in the New York territory were like boxing rings. They were hard as a carpet that we're sitting on right now. They were boxing rings. They had no give to them. And Vince said, Bruno is tired. He's worn out, he's beat up, and he wants to retire. He wants to work a little bit, but he doesn't want to work the full-time schedule, and he wants to drop the strap. And he says, I think you'd be perfect to take the strap. And then he said, but I've got a guy named Bob Backlund that I'm in the process of training and preparing to take Bruno's spot permanently. You will be an interim champion from this date, the exact date he gave me to take the strap, take the belt, to the exact date that I would surrender and give up the belt back to Backlund. And it was just short of a year, 11 months, 10 and a half months, something like that. So anyway, I said, that's great. That's fantastic. I'd be glad to, happy to. So we did it, and we did it in Baltimore. Why did we do it in Baltimore when all the title changes happened in New York, Madison Square Garden. Well, Vince Sr. was the mastermind behind that. He said, it's time that we do it in another city to catch the fans off guard. Well, when I walked into Baltimore, April 30th, 1977, there's all these cameras and these scaffolding, which were never there before in the city, and Vince Jr. sitting ringside and all the TV crew, and so it's kind of obvious something's going to happen here tonight. You know, I'm the main event against Bruno, and we have cameras for the first time ever. Cameras were set up in Baltimore, and so I think the fans might kind of catch on to what's going on here, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter at all. And so, sure enough, we made the exchange in Baltimore, and it was a living hell getting out of that ring when I took that belt from Bruno and had cheated by putting my feet. And Vince McMahon Sr. insisted, not only do I put my feet on the ropes to cheat, but I put my feet on the top turnbuckle. So every fan in the house knew that I cheated to beat Bruno for the belt. Usually you don't put your feet on the top turnbuckle if you're going to pin somebody and use the ropes for leverage. This is the second turnbuckle, maybe the first one or the second. He said, you put your feet on the top turnbuckle. And so you go back in history and look at the still photographs or the video, and you'll see my feet, and I was bleeding heavily because I felt the least I could do for Bruno Sammartino is bleed for the man, because he's surrendering the belt, this priceless belt, to me. And so I'm going to show gratitude for him and just cut my head open and bleed half to death in honor of him surrendering the belt to me. And man, I put my feet on the top rope, and when that referee counted 3, all hell broke loose when they realized that it was for real. And I rolled over, and I got up, and the referee came over and raised my hand, and I had that iconic still photograph. I may not have sent it to you yet, but I will, of the referee with my hand raised with the belt in my hand and the blood pouring down my body. And the fans absolutely were in a frenzy. You're supposed to turn the house lights on in between matches so you can see to get out, because it's very dark in Baltimore. You look at the still photos and some of the video, little lamp type things over the ring, very dark arena. And man, the guy that's supposed to turn the house lights on was watching the deal. He got so into it, he forgot to turn the house lights on. So it's dark, and I'm trying to get out of the ring, and all the fans close off the aisle. It's just little ropes anyway, around cement, little barriers, and the fans closed off the exit row. So I rolled the belt up around this right hand, and it had about this much belt showing and pouring blood. And I said, I got to get out of this ring. And I stepped out, and I started swinging that belt, man, like a helicopter blade. And I whacked people. I mean, I hit people with the belt, and people were hitting me. People were kicking me. People were throwing things at me, chairs. It was like a riot trying to get out of that ring. I never had felt that type of intensity in my entire life. Trying to get back to the locker room, I had to fight my way all the way back, all the way, getting kicked, getting punched, getting hit with. I think they were selling bottles of beer at the time, not even cups, chairs, everything imaginable. Little old ladies with fighting fingernail file things, reaching through, stabbing you. And so it was absolute chaos and pandemonium. The word pandemonium really comes into play here. Pure pandemonium broke loose. And I finally got back to the locker room, showered off, got the blood off me, threw my stuff in the bag, cleared out of there. I said, thank you, Bruno, brother. I got to beat the crowd, man. He says, I'll see you, superstar. And, of course, it was the first match after intermission. There was like 5 more matches, and a battle royal to follow to hold the crowd so I could get out of the building. And I ran out the back door, grabbed the first cab I got, man, it was gone.
Why was it in those days that they didn't have the main event on last in the New York territory?
Because I asked that very question, because it was very odd that the main event didn't go on last. And the reason it all happened, putting the main event on early enough so the main event people could get out of the building before the matches were over, was when Pedro Morales was the champion. And all the Puerto Rican fans were coming to the matches. And one day, Blackjack Mulligan was wrestling against Pedro Morales in Boston when Pedro was the champion. And a Puerto Rican fan sitting ringside got up out of his chair, and Blackjack Mulligan was laying on the apron selling for Pedro Morales with his back towards the fans, and come up to the ringside, opened up his blade, and cut Blackjack Mulligan from the hip all the way to the ankle, past the knee, halfway down the calf, cut him to the bone, and just folded his blade, put it back in his pocket, and walked out of the building. And he was wrestling Pedro Morales, and the Puerto Rican fans, a lot of them carried knives. And so that incident, they said, we can't have this. This was early on in Pedro's run as champion. And it was very, very dangerous for the challenger of Pedro Morales, and that sealed the deal. That did it. They said from that point on, we're going to put the main event on early enough so if there is an altercation, at least the heel can get out of the building safely without all the fans waiting at the back entrance. And so that started the main event going on early.
Do you think the reaction would have been even worse if you had won the belt in New York from the fans?
No, it couldn't have been worse.
Well, you could have died.
It could have been worse. It was chaos. It was pandemonium. It couldn't have been worse. You know, the whole territory was hot.
Yeah. What was the New York fans' reaction the first time you wrestled in Madison Square Garden after the belt win?
Well, as you know, there was no internet. There was all we had were the magazines, and they were usually 6 months behind in their publications. So it was an unknown, basically, that I had won the belt. And when I walked out, my match was scheduled against Gorilla Monsoon. Underneath, Bruno Sammartino, WWF champion against George the Animal Steele. That was the card that was set in Madison Square Garden. Well, I walked out there for my match against Gorilla Monsoon, and I purposely wore one of my robes instead of a tie-dye T-shirt. It had a lot of ropes too, to hide the belt, to make the belt more shock value when I undid my. So I got to the ring. Gorilla Monsoon was already in the ring. They're unaware of the title change. I walk out to the ring, the belt's underneath my robe. I get in the ring and undo that belt, undo the knot, take this robe off, and there's the belt, Bruno Sammartino's belt. Unbuckled the belt, held it up. I'm your champion. And the people jumped. They jumped to their feet. They rose to their feet in unison, and it was like the noise, the decibels just was like, no. It was like almost like godlike. It was like I defeated a god of some kind. That they were in such disbelief that it was like I was even astounded at the reaction that had happened. You know, that I was the new champion, and the announcer announced it. Superstar beat Bruno Sammartino in Baltimore last month. He's the new champion.
And how did you draw as champion for WWF, as it was known at the time?
I drew very well. As a matter of fact, Dave Meltzer did some research a long time ago, and he found out that out of all the main events I had in Madison Square Garden, I think it was 19 or 20 or 21 main event matches. I had sold out every main event match out of the 20 or 21 main events that I was the main event part of a tag match or a single match, 20 out of the 21 I had sold out, which was an all-time highest percentage level of sellouts for Madison Square Garden. It wasn't the most because I didn't have the longest front, but it was the highest percentage. And the only match that did not sell out at Madison Square Garden was against Peter Maivia. And Vince McMahon Sr. told me he really didn't believe it was going to sell out because the fans do not believe that a Samoan chief is going to be their next champion because of the tattooing and all the garb, all the Polynesian garb that he was wearing, which really looked fantastic and spectacular. And he really was a Samoan chief. He really was.
But you still had a very high crowd for that.
Oh, we drew right at 20,000 people, and the building held, the main floor held 21,200, something like that. To some exact figures, right at 2,100. We had right over 20,000 people in the building, and then said, well, this is pretty amazing, especially with the fans knowing that he's not going to be the champion.
Compared to NWA, for instance, who very rarely had numbers in those figures for the title matches in their main arenas.
Yes, and I don't know about the size of the venues, but I know that Ric Flair had told me when he was champion. But this has never been in publication. I don't think I've ever even said it during an interview. Of all the interviews I've did of my whole career, Ric Flair told me personally when Hulk Hogan was champion that he didn't understand why. And it drove Ric Flair crazy. He was livid about it. Why people were so enamored and so gaga over Hulk Hogan, and why is Hulk Hogan drawing such huge numbers of people and I'm not, even though he was drawing very well, Ric Flair, in his various championship runs.
To maybe 15,000 usually.
Exactly.
Which is nothing.
But he said, why? Flair told me this, superstar. Why do so many people talk about Hogan? That's all I hear. This was a confession to almost Flair to me, a confidential thing. He says, why? He says, it's driving me crazy. All I hear is Hulk Hogan this and Hulk Hogan that. I said, Rick, the man is over. It's a phenomenon. I can't explain it, but it's Hulk Hogan. He says, yeah, but I'm Ric Flair, Nature Boy Ric Flair. I said, I know, and you're fantastic, and you're entertaining, and you're an incredible performer, and you work your butt off, man. You take incredible, and you do this, and you do that. He said, yeah, but all they want to talk about is Hulk Hogan. It bothered him so much that that was the talk. He said, that's all the talk is Hulk Hogan.
Just because, do you think a lot of that had to do with New York being kind of the center?
Yeah,
of the United
the hub.
States?
New York being the
So
hub.
You were in New York. You were the show.
Yeah, exactly.
Talking about Ric Flair, do you want to tell us how you knew Ric Flair?
That goes back to AWA when it was training.
You used to carry your bags, wash your car.
Yeah.
Basically,
Drive my car.
he
I'd stay over.
He was your bitch. He actually modeled himself after you at first.
And for a while he did, yeah. Yeah, for a while he
You and
did.
Dusty Rhodes were two
Yeah.
of his
Yeah.
idols. So we were talking about the NWA Championship. You actually had a pretty big match during this run when you were WWF champion against Harley Race, who was the NWA champion. Can you tell us a bit about that match and why it was so special?
Yes, that was the first ever WWF title match versus the NWA title match. And it was, I think initially conceived by Eddie Graham, and then Vince Sr. Jumped on board, and because I was really the first WWF champion to leave the territory and go to other territories and take that belt outside of the New York territory, and so it was such a natural to do in Miami because there's so many New York fans that would come down to Miami for the wintertime to get out of the New York weather, that being in Miami would have a lot of East Coast fans other than Florida fans. And so that match came about by the brainchild of Eddie Graham. And of course, it was outdoors at the Orange Bowl. And they insisted on going 2 out of 3 falls, and which the WWF was never, by that time, never a 2 out of 3 fall type thing. And I really kind of fought against it in the locker room. I said, you want us to go a full hour? I said, that's again NWA stuff, 1 hour matches. I said, WWF. I said, we're 15 minutes, we're 18-minute stuff, 20 minutes max, And I said, there's no reason. I said, to have the thing in a draw, I get a fall, Hardy gets a fall, and then the time runs out. I said, just disqualify me. I get a fall, we both get a fall, and then just DQ me, and I'll walk to the locker room. But there's no reason to stay out there for a full hour to wrestle. I said, it just doesn't make sense. An hour, I said, it's not even my style. I said, I'll go an hour, of course. But right away there was resistance to it because they had already planned on going a full hour, and it was raining on top of it, and it was outdoors. And I said to myself, whoever thought this deal up, being outdoors in the rain, is bad weather in Florida, very unpredictable weather, and sure enough, here comes the rain halfway through the match, and we're slipping and we're sliding. It made it very, very difficult. And I don't know. Hardy was a fantastic general. He could lead a match, and I had to slow way down to go that hour. And he would even tell me early on in the match, he said, Billy, slow down. We got an hour to do out here, brother. Slow down. He said, we're not in the garden. He talked to me in the ring, and I had so much respect for Harley Race. Oh, I said, okay, brother, I'll slow down. Yeah, we do. We have an hour. I said, we don't need to, but I said, maybe I'll just cut this thing short and get DQ'd. I'll get counted out. What are they going to do to me? And he'd laugh. He said, no. He said, don't do that, Billy. Don't do it. Let's go the hour. I almost did it at one point. At about 40 minutes, I said, another 20 minutes? We don't need it already. He said, come on, man, we can do this. Anyway, we did the hour outdoors. It was raining. Half the time it was raining. We were slipping and falling, and I thought it wasn't a very historical. It was historical in the fact it was belt versus belt. In that was the first time. There's a lot of talk about that, a lot of coverage, but the match itself was nothing exceptional.
And while we're talking about Harley, why does everyone have so much respect for him? You never hear anyone say anything bad about Harley.
I don't know how to answer that. I know I did from day one. Just his technical skill, his ring skill. I remember working with him when he came into the WWF, 2 W's by then, and having some matches with Harley, and he was like so calm in the ring. He was so cool and collected. He never got rattled, and he was just so dependable. And just everything about his in-ring, performance and the respectability was just enormous. And so that's all I can think of, is that he just had that type of respect because of his ability. His technical skills were really, really superior.
So you had a lot of great feuds when you were champion, one of your big feuds was with Dusty Rhodes. What was that like, having that feud in such a big stage like New York?
That was really great. Dusty coming up to New York and working with me, it brought a new level of excitement to the to the wrestling.
Were coming out at that point.
Huh?
Weren't celebrities coming out to?
Yeah, different celebrities were coming out. Yeah, I can't remember who and what, but there were different movie celebrities and people like that coming out to the matches and stuff, and so it's becoming very mainstream. And but some of the fun matches were with Dusty, and it was just an automatic sellout with Dusty Rhodes. And I remember our second match in the Garden. Right after the second match, there was no plans for a third match, and we came back into the locker room, and Dusty told Vince Senior, Vince, why don't we come back and let's do a third match and bring the bull rope. Let me bring the bull rope in and announce it right now, bull rope match for the belt. And on the spot, one of the very rare things I believe Vince Senior ever did out of context, because everything was right by the book. He had it all mapped out, month after month after month, week after week after week, what he was going to do. But this thing was so enticing to Vince Senior, this bull rope match. He said it'll sell out immediately, bull rope match for the belt. And so on the spot, after our match, in the locker room, Dusty convinced Vince Senior, convinced him to book that match, and they went out and announced it, and they sold half the building out that night on advance tickets, just on a bull rope coming back against Dusty Rhodes. And of course, the next day, in a couple of days, it was totally sold out. No tickets left for Madison Square Garden for a month away. And so the bull rope was just phenomenal.
And those were some of the most
exciting. Yeah.
Brutal matches. You actually were bleeding a lot in these years. Wrestling was actually becoming very bloody in all the territories in these years.
Yes, the 70s, the decade of the 70s. Mid-70s on was a lot of blood. And Florida, there was so much blood in Florida. I don't know why with Dusty and everything down in Florida, there was so much blood, but it really started getting bloody in the 70s, the mid-70s. And then almost every match with Dusty was going to be blood involved, And Vince Senior tried to use blood sparingly in Madison Square Garden because he used that as a finish for a match to stop the match because of too much blood to end the match as a finish. So if you bled all the time, you're going to see so much blood, but there's no reason to stop a match. Madison Square Garden.
Sensitized to it. All right, so you started to become a babyface actually towards the end, not on purpose, but the fans began to like you. Why do you think that was?
Well, it was because I was an entertainer. I was an entertainer, just like Dusty was an entertainer, and he was a babyface, and I was an entertainer, and it was a natural entertainer. And with my promos and not being a hardcore heel like an Ivan Koloff, Russian Bear, type, or Baron von Raschke, a German, the stereotypical hated villain. I was superstar Billy Graham, the man of the hour, the man with the power, too sweet to be sour, and I would cut colorful promos, and I would entertain people. And so it was almost hard to dislike me. And so all of a sudden signs started popping up, superstar this, superstar that, and I became a babyface champion. Even though I was wrestling, it was hard to wrestle other babyfaces because I was developing a real following, and it was because of my entertaining value that I added to the product. I wasn't a hardcore, old school heel type. The Koloffs and the Von Raschkes.
And there's a famous picture of you out on the streets of New York, absolutely surrounded by fans. How did that come about?
New York was the fans were so into their wrestling. And by that time, I was so over with all of my rhymes and all of my persona and my personality that, and I was so accessible. I wasn't an Ivan Koloff on the streets of New York wouldn't have let a fan get near him because it was strictly, that was old school thinking. But I was just so, I enjoyed the fans, and the fans enjoyed me, and I was accessible. And so once I became accessible, then the fans really started, coming towards me. And so the streets of New York, on that one series of photos that you're talking about, signing autographs, was like the Pied Piper everywhere I went. And I jumped up on a cement a garbage can made out of cement and did that famous Times Square pose, ripped my shirt off posing in Times Square. They'd never seen anything like it. And it was really, really entertainment was what I was giving the fans. And they knew I was an entertainer, and I didn't try to hide being an entertainer. And so I was accessible, and I was fun. I was having fun with the fans. I wasn't being a heel of the fans. And so that just allowed more fans to come in. And that was my true calling.
Yeah.
Yeah, my true calling was to be a...
Do you think you could have been, I've heard Vince McMahon say you could have been Hulk Hogan if they had let you have
Yes.
the babyface run, but unfortunately it was still senior running it at that time. Do you think you could have really exploded and become a worldwide phenomenon if you had had the chance?
No question. I believe that. I sincerely believe that if I would have been given the push, and I'd talked to Vince Sr. one time about it, just once with Ivan Koloff, and as my tag team partner in the locker room, I said getting towards the end when it was time to give the belt to Backlund, I said, Vince, I said, do you realize that if you have Ivan Koloff turn on me,
Would have been sellouts for months.
In the garden, do an angle where he turns on me and double crosses me, and we come back and have a match, I will be the hottest baby face other than Bruno Sammartino. I made sure I threw that in because it was true. Could not follow his legacy, and I made sure that they knew about that.
The thing about Bruno is he had a certain appeal to immigrants, and he really appealed to that New York territory where you had kind of a wide
universal
appeal.
Yeah, I had a universal appeal. Yeah, I crossed ethnic borders where Bruno was really New York was so ethnic bound that the Italians and everything but I had crossed all lines, I had crossed all borders, and I had all types of fans. Well, yeah, the black people love the rapping and everything, and I told them, I said, just if you do it, I said we're gonna have a sellout after sellout after sellout. I said I'm going to be the hottest baby face other than Bruno Sammartino ever in this territory, and we're going to do nothing but big. And right before I give the belt to Backlund, right before the Monday night before I give the belt to Backlund, I have a match in Pittsburgh against Ivan Putski, a cage match, sellout, turn away 2,000-3,000 people. Friday night. Saturday night, Philadelphia, cage match against Bruno Sammartino. Set the all-time attendance record for the Spectrum. Almost 20,000 people inside this Philadelphia Spectrum for the cage match. They were this far from the ring. They put the chairs up. You could barely walk to get into the ring. It had so many people there. All-time attendance record. And then the following Monday, I give the belt up. I'm coming off of 2 straight turnaway sell, and Philadelphia sellout was like they turned away maybe 5,000 people. They said it was on the news. Don't go near the Spectrum. Don't go near the Spectrum. On the local news, there's thousands of people trying to get in the Spectrum. It's been sold out for weeks, and now we have almost 5,000 people trying to get in the Spectrum. There's cars everywhere. There's traffic jams everywhere. Don't go near the Spectrum. And so all of this excitement and sellouts right before I had to give this thing to Backlund. And I'm saying...
It must have been incredibly frustrating for you.
Yeah. It was, I really couldn't figure it out. I said, what, is he this committed to Bob Backlund? Is Vince Sr. this, and which he was, because he did not want to be proven wrong, Vince Sr. He had put a year into getting Bob Backlund over every week on television. Every week on a full year. And he did not want to be proven wrong. And he was going to go through with this title change, come hell or high water, an earthquake, a hurricane, whatever is going to happen. This thing is going to be changed, and Backlund is going to be my champion, no matter what. And I told Bruno. Oddly enough, Bruno didn't even know about the change in Philadelphia 2 days before. The Saturday, the night we had our big cage match sellout, 2 days before I gave it to Backlund. He said, "You're going to do what on Monday?" Because Bruno was just working sparingly at that time. It wasn't really in the loop and didn't want to be in the loop. I said, "Yeah, I'm giving the belt to Backlund on Monday." He said, "You're what? You're giving the belt to Backlund?" He was that far out of the loop at the time. And I said, "Yeah, it's been set up for months." I said, "I'm going to give the belt to Backlund." He said, "Oh, my God." And I came so close to giving the belt back to Bruno in Philadelphia during that cage match, because it was the first guy out of the cage was the winner. And I was gonna do a double cross, and I told Bruno, you might be coming out of here the champion again." He says, "Oh, Billy, don't do that." He says, "Please don't do that to me." And I was gonna double cross Vince Sr. and do something where I was hurt and I couldn't get out of the cage, and Bruno would have to leave the cage first or expose the business. And I came that close to doing it, so it would throw the Bob Backlund switch off. You couldn't put Bruno Sammartino against Bob Backlund, or against,
But you did. You ended up doing what you
doing
were
it. Oh,
supposed
yes,
to do.
had to do it. Yeah.
Of course, those thoughts were to go through your head. Can you tell us about that night where you had to lose the title?
Oh, it was depressing. It was depressing because if I wasn't such a success, had been such a success, and knew I was going to continue to be a success, it wouldn't have been as difficult. But coming off these 2 or 3 sellouts, everything sold out and turned away, record crowds, red hot. I'm saying, what is the sense? This doesn't make business sense to turn this thing over to a kid, to a kid. I mean, it was very depressing. And I remember I had to wrestle down in New Jersey somewhere, and that night Valerie was out. We stayed out on Long Island. After the match, I just went out and got her and drove down to New Jersey somewhere, and that's it's over.
Was that it? Was there any rematches with Backlund?
Oh, yes. I had three rematches with Backlund. Everything sold out, of course. And then had matches in other cities with him, and then started working with Dusty to support Backlund, working with other people on top. And Vince had to load up the cards with Andre and myself, and matches like that to get houses with Backlund, because they just did not accept Backlund as champion. It was force fed, and it was so obvious that you're giving it to almost like a child, taking it from Sammartino, my God, a living, breathing, idol, a true idol in every sense of the word, and then coming off of me, with everything that I had to offer, the physique and everything, the pandemonium and all the sellouts, and then handing it over to a kid.
What was the crowd reaction when he won the title that night?
Oh, the crowd popped. They it was nothing like the pandemonium in reverse when I took it from Bruno, but yeah, the crowd reacted, sure,
So what ended your run in WWE? What made you?
Well, I just got tired, after that, 7 months. I think I lasted about 7 months after that, and I just got tired of working and wrestling, and I said, I just need to take a break and get away from this thing, and I did, I was tired of supporting Backlund, to be honest about it, and playing a supporting role, you know. And so I just said,
with you on the cards and with
Yeah,
the stacked
exactly.
cards,
Yeah.
Vince was guaranteed
Yeah.
to still have the good
Right.
crowds. So did you really ever stop wrestling, or is that kind of wrestling folklore?
Oh, I stopped. Yeah, I completely stopped. And I had a friend of mine who had a water sprinkling system, irrigation system here in Phoenix. And I went to work for him, putting in underground water sprinklers. And right after that championship run, I completely quit wrestling. I totally lost all interest in it and didn't want to wrestle. And so I just get a job.
And you didn't mind working a normal job? After
No,
all that?
I didn't mind at all. I didn't mind at all. It didn't bother me because I never believed my own PR. I never believed the whole championship thing, the whole, you know, even though everything was sold out, it was great business, it was fun, it was this, it was that. I never believed the champion thing was real. I never believed the whole thing is it's a fairy tale world we're living in here. It's a work. Come on, everybody, it's a work. You know, I didn't believe my own PR. That's why it was easy for me to transition to a normal job. I didn't believe my own PR.
And what was with the rumor that you were dead?
Gorilla Monsoon said he heard that I had passed away from some unknown strange illness. And he called some newspaper in Phoenix, because he knew this was my home, to confirm it. And nobody could confirm it, so he just assumed that it must be true. So he wrote the article, "The Superstar Billy Graham has sadly passed away." And I said, "You really wrote the article on those circumstances, that just because nobody could actually confirm that I had actually died, that you just assumed that I had died and you wrote an article?" He said, "Yeah, I guess I shouldn't have, but I did." That is so bizarre.
Did you hear about the article right away, or?
Yeah, it didn't take long. Yeah, it was in the New York Post, New York
Yeah,
Times.
everyone knew about it.
Yeah. Superstar Billy Graham had died, you know.
So you had your hiatus, which was, I'm not sure exactly how long, and then you decided to come back. What led to your comeback? Was it money?
Yeah, well, yeah. I wanted to make some money, and I was still in physical, you know, good shape. I was physically healthy still, and so I decided I'll just give it another run, but I'm not going to come back as the Superstar Billy Graham. And I changed my my attire, my look, to a karate gimmick look. Out of
Was karate popular at the time?
no, not at all. It was a rebellion position on my part, that I'm not going to come back as the Superstar Billy Graham. I'm going to come back as another character, because I don't even care, because it was really a miscarriage of justice, even though it was business and I knew it was coming and I agreed to it and everything like that. And I, you know, but I said it just wasn't right. It was a bad decision to make Backlund champion when I was so hot, red hot, that he should have at least stretched it out a little bit longer, or even put Backlund on the shelf for a bit to get. We were drawing real money,
Yeah.
big sellouts, turning people away. I mean, from a promoter standpoint, I thought this is ludicrous to just walk away from that.
And when you came back as your karate character, you actually still had enough heat from your first run that you were still selling out arenas. Can you tell
The
us?
name, the Superstar Billy Graham name was so strong that it still did sell out business, even though a lot of people and a lot of fans didn't believe it was really the Superstar Billy Graham with the blonde hair and the tie-dye. They didn't believe it was the same person. And but enough of them did believe that the name was so strong that it drew and it did sell out. And
how long was your run in WWE with that gimmick?
probably 6 months,
6 months.
very short.
And was Backlund over more than he had been by that time?
I had paid no attention to it. Yeah, I paid no attention to it. It was like it was like such a struggle to even.
You were depressed at that time.
Extremely
obviously.
depressed.
And it was around this time that more and more wrestlers were actually copying your original gimmick. We all talk about Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, and Jesse Ventura was even doing it. Can you tell us some of your memories of Jesse Ventura? You knew him from a young age.
Oh, yeah. When I was first in the AWA, Jesse had just come back from the Navy SEALs and came to see me wrestle, perform in Minneapolis because his brother had been writing him letters while he was out at sea as a Navy SEAL about superstar Billy Graham. And when you get back, you've got to see this guy with the tie-dye and the 22-inch arms and all of this. And so Jesse was very, very excited about seeing me in person. And he actually is quoted as saying that he went to the matches and said, "Give me the best ticket you have left in the house." And the lady says, "Well, you're in luck, sir. We have one ringside seat left." And he said, "I'll take it." So Jesse bought the ringside seat, saw me, and said, "That's what I want to do. I want to be a wrestler, and that's who I want to be like, superstar Billy Graham." And so Jesse started recording my interviews on the old big 8-track cassette things for the videos, not videos, but soundtrack tapes, and drive around Minneapolis listening to my promos and memorizing my promos, and started copying me to the T, and actually tracked me down in a gym downtown Minneapolis one day, and introduced himself and had his hair bleached blonde by then, and said, "I'm going to be a wrestler, and I want to be like you." I said, "Well, thanks. That's a compliment. That's a real compliment, that I've got that kind of influence on you." He said, "What do you recommend? How do I do this thing?" I said, "Well, if you don't want," I said, "this is your home." I said, "It's best to go away and learn how to be a wrestler in some other city so you can come back to your home as a polished wrestler and be successful." I said, "You don't want to go through the early stages of your career here in your hometown." And so that's what he did. I think he went to Portland and started his career in Portland.
And there's actually an interesting story you told me about how Jesse met his wife.
Oh.
Can you share that with us?
Yeah, that's a good story. Jesse was bouncing in a nightclub, and his wife, to-be, his future wife, was a biker bar. She came in and said he had his hair bleached blonde by now, and said, "You look like superstar Billy Graham." And we do kind of have some features that we kind of look alike a little bit. And she says, "You really look like superstar Billy Graham." And he says, "Well, I should. I'm his brother." He says, "You got to be kidding. You're his brother?" And he says, "Yes." And she says, "I really like his body." And Jesse said, "Well, I like his body too. I want one just like it. I want a physique just like my brother, superstar Billy Graham." She says, "No." She says, "I really like his body. I really like his body." And so Jesse caught on, and he said, "Well, if you want his body, you got to go through me first." And so she says, "Okay." And so I was told this story later by Jesse and Terry Ventura. And so, sure enough, they have their little fling, and they fall in love, and they get married, and she eventually becomes the first lady of Minnesota, Terry Ventura.
Would you say you're most proud of Jesse, of all of the wrestlers who have kind of looked up to you over the years?
I guess I'm very proud of him. I mean, he's such an individual, so unique, even outside of the world of wrestling, of course, being governor, and he's very different. That's for sure. But he's just a lot of fun, and it's really, really nice to have people think of your image so much that they want to copy you and be like you and look like you and aspire to perform like you and to impress them to that degree. It's very much of a compliment. A lot of fans got very jealous of Jesse and Hulk and people like that who were trying to impersonate my look, and would actually tell me so. I said, "But don't worry about it." I said, "It's a compliment. It's a compliment." I said, "To try to be like someone else." I said, "That's the way I see it. I don't see it as them stealing anything from me or taking anything from me. I see it as a compliment that I have something to give worth taking, you know? And so that's how that happened.
So after your run in WWE, your second or your run as the karate character, you ended up returning to Mid-Atlantic Wrestling, which was an NWA territory, as the old superstar Billy Graham. What made you go back to your roots and get into that territory as your old character?
Well, Dusty was the booker by then. Dusty had come into the Carolinas and he was the booker. And I thought this would be a good change. I'd never been there to that territory. And I said, you know, it'll be good. And it was good. And but it was just a lot of, I didn't like the style. And for one thing, they put me with another manager, Paul Jones, did all my promos. The promo thing was so rushed. They had so many guys. It was just very, very uncomfortable for me. And having to share promo time, which was not nearly the promo time we had in New York. It was like 1/3 or less of the promo time in Charlotte. And so then having a manager to speak for you, it was just very uncomfortable, and I felt very unproductive in the Charlotte territory. And I came in initially with a karate look, and then eventually decided to change that look back to my original look in Charlotte.
Didn't you become a baby face when you changed back to the original look?
Yes. When I came back, they turned me babyface, and it worked. It worked good, and but I was just tired. I was just tired of the traveling. There's a lot of traveling in the Carolinas, a lot of driving, and back roads, and I just didn't like it there. I didn't like living there, even though I was successful coming back with my tie-dye look and everything, and the two-tone beard that I have now and all that. Very successful, but I just didn't like the overall territory as a whole.
So you started as a babyface there for the first real run as a babyface. Then you went back to the WWE, this time as a babyface. What was there? Did you come in and suggest that you wanted to be a babyface? Did they want to bring you in? How did that come about?
Well, it was also because that I really didn't have the when I came back with the two-tone goatee and everything, and I didn't have the mechanical skill to be a heel and take bumps. Like a heel should really take bumps correctly. Like you can get away, a babyface can get away a lot easier without having to take bumps for the heel. The heel needs to take bumps for a babyface. There's no question about that. And so it was just easier for me and my persona and my promos and everything, and physically. And I suggested that to Vince, and he agreed. And so we brought me back in with being a babyface, and instantly did an angle with Butch Reed, and which was a mid-card angle.
Yeah.
It wasn't a full-blown main event angle. It was a mid-card angle.
And it was around that time that you actually had to get a hip operation.
Yes. It was beginning to get so bad, the pain, that I finally had to stop wrestling and become more of a commentator. Vince said, let's try you commentating. And he was very accommodating to me, and I really enjoyed commentating, and thought I was doing well at commentating. And but then I had my hip surgery, and then continued commentating, and then Vince thought I would do well as a manager with Don Morocco. And so we gave that a little bit of a run, and I just wasn't comfortable. I was hurting. I was having all kinds of physical problems, and my heart wasn't into being a manager.
Was it because also you just really didn't connect with that particular wrestler, or
Oh no, Don Morocco was great to be a manager for because they were really giving him a big push, and he was really over. And but I just didn't. And I really cut some good promos for Don.
they had him coming out in the tie dye and
He-
coming out to Jesus Christ Superstar.
Right, exactly. But it just didn't work because it didn't fit for me either. And I would rather have been just a straight commentator instead of a manager. I enjoyed commentating much more, and I believe I should have really been given a chance.
You commentated SummerSlam '88.
SummerSlam, exactly '88, right?
Gorilla Monsoon.
Right, with Gorilla Monsoon.
Much of the
I really enjoyed that. I thought I did a good job. I got a lot of good compliments off of it. And but Vince just wasn't into me being a commentator. He just didn't want to do it, didn't want to go for it. And I thought that I was really catching on and having fun doing it and enjoyed it. And but Vince just didn't want to go for it, just didn't want to do it. And I got the phone call one day, and he said, "Superstar, quote, we're going to have to put you in the bullpen for a while." He says, "I'm just not happy with the commentating." He says, "You're doing a good job, but I just don't think it's working out right. And so I'm going to have to put you in the bullpen." I said, "Oh, okay." And so that means I'm not going to be having a job. He says, "Well, if you want to put it that way," that's what it kind of amounts to when you get put in the bullpen. So.
Did Morocco's getting fired have anything to do with your end to managing him?
It probably sealed the deal, and I forgot the exact details of his firing, but
I believe he was asked to do a urine test for Nick Bockwinkel, and he.
yes, that was exactly right.
Can
Right.
you tell that story?
I can't remember the details of it. I can't remember the details
He
of
ended
it.
up urinating on an agent,
On the what?
but I think Nick asked him to piss in the cup, and he pissed directly on the agent. And just a little bit about your time in WWE at this point. What was the steroid use like among wrestlers in this era of WWE compared to your first run in WWE?
Oh, it had exploded. The use of steroids had exploded to a new, before it was, no one was really doing it hardly at all that I was aware of. But now on this run, it had really, really taken off, and guys were really using a lot of steroids, and it was pretty obvious, and also other drugs, and but steroids had really taken off by this time.
Would you see the steroid use in the dressing rooms?
Oh yes, very blatant use. I had given a couple guys some shots myself in locker rooms, and right out in the open, and there was no even attempt to conceal it.
The agents didn't really mind.
Wait till an agent was out of the room or something. Yeah, it's very simple.
And there was actually a doctor at the time who was actually selling steroids and other drugs to wrestlers right in the WWE locker rooms. Was he there every night, or was it at certain TV tapings? How did that work?
Yes, that was Dr. George Zahorian from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and he would come to the Harrisburg the tapings. He would come to our tapings and be in the arena and openly sell steroids and other drugs backstage in the locker room to the wrestlers, and right out in the open. So there was no trying to conceal it. And
so it was right in the dressing room.
Oh, in the dressing room, yes, absolutely, right out in the open, the
Just
dressing
had a
room.
big bag of
Yeah,
whatever
yeah,
you
have a
wanted.
bag with your name on it and
So you
everything.
would pre-order these.
Pre-ordered, yeah, a lot of pre-orders, and he had already have them packed. Billy Graham, so and so, And then others would, a lot of times, would just buy on the spot.
And would wrestlers ever get steroids mailed to them from these doctors?
Oh yes, that was the big trial, was the FedEx discovery of all the boxes going out to various wrestlers, and the big investigation that led to the trial and eventual conviction of Zahorian for mailing and selling and distributing steroids via FedEx. And so
that was actually what he was convicted on, mailing steroids via FedEx.
Exactly, right, because there was a FedEx employee that noticed all these boxes going out from Dr. George Zahorian, as a wrestling fan who worked for FedEx, who saw all the packages going out and said, from Dr. George Zahorian to all these wrestling guys, and he's a fan, so he recognized the names. He said, there's something wrong here. So he tipped off the FBI, as a guy who worked for FedEx.
Was this before or after steroids were made illegal?
This, I can't remember. It might have been probably before, during, and after.
Right.
Most likely. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. We'll get back to the steroids a little bit more in a bit. Just to get back to that time in WWE, they, according to Dynamite Kid's book, they put a no-blood policy into place around 1988. Kind of coincided when the Wrestling Commission deregulated wrestling, because I guess one of the issues was wrestling was fake, but you're still doing blood matches. So I guess they kind of admitted wrestling was fake. And
well, Vince admitted that himself when the governor, the female governor of New Jersey, made the big stink about steroids in pro wrestling, and Vince, I can't think of her name right now, but Vince said, well, we just won't wrestle in New Jersey anymore, and you're going to lose a lot of revenue. And so she reversed her stance.
Did you hear about the no blood policy at that time?
Yes, I was there during that time of the no blood policy, and
it was basically you'd get a fine if you bled on purpose.
Exactly, right. And they said they were very concerned about HIV was the reason for the no blood was HIV. They didn't want anybody with HIV positive wrestling, so that was the reason for all the urine testing and no blood.
Were you surprised when they got rid of the no blood policy later on?
Oh, not surprised, no. I knew it was just a matter of time until it would wean itself down, and then blood would start coming back around.
Do you think there was any less risk of HIV or diseases like Hep C when they got rid of the no blood policy in 1997?
When they stopped it?
Yeah. Do you think
and began blood again?
And they actually promoted blood matches again. Do you think there was any less risk during that era of Hep C or HIV?
Oh, no, there was no less risk. There was, since they started introducing blood again, there was a bigger risk because of allowing blood,
So you think it was a business decision?
Purely a business decision and a public relations business decision.
So around the last run in the 80s, it's very well known that a lot of wrestlers were doing cocaine, many other drugs. A lot of wrestlers have died early because of this. Was it openly being used, the recreational drugs in the dressing rooms, or was that saved to the hotel rooms and the after parties?
I had seen it openly used in locker rooms, other drugs such as cocaine. I had seen it openly used when an agent wouldn't be in the room or finagle it, or into a restroom or something. Yeah, it was very active backstage, very active.
And finally for the 1980s, a wrestler that was from Phoenix, big bodybuilder guy that started to get a huge push in the 80s, was the Ultimate Warrior. What are your thoughts on the Ultimate Warrior, and did you know him at all, being from Phoenix as well?
I never really socialized with him. He had a really nice gym here in Phoenix, in Scottsdale, a suburb of Phoenix, and but he was very, very, very nice to me, very polite and everything. But there was a very wild streak in him that he was so animated, and so I don't know how to exactly characterize his personality, but he was different, and he was very hyper and very on the move, and very aggressive, and very different, and very dedicated to bodybuilding, and for sure. I mean, look at his physique, you know. And so there was a lot of things going on to keep a physique like that.
And you were telling me a story about an unusual drive that you had with him. Would you like to tell us about that?
I was in a car in Portland, Oregon with him driving, and I was in the back seat with Dynamite Kid and Davey Boy Smith on each side of me, and somebody in the front seat, maybe Morocco, I don't know. But anyway, he was obviously under the influence of some sort of drug, probably a hallucinating drug. That the British Bulldogs were very famous for spiking drinks. They had put a lot of drugs in a lot of people's drinks, and I doubt that they had spiked anything to the Ultimate Warrior's drink, because he didn't need any assistance to indulge. But it was just a 90-mile-an-hour ride through suburbs to get to the arena, and the Bulldogs were laughing hysterically, and I'm frozen, sitting in the middle and watching the Ultimate Warrior out of control, and it was just a ride from hell, and but there were definitely drugs involved in that ride, there was no question about it, and it was just it was surreal. It was surreal. Thank God we all lived through it, and there was but it was so bizarre, because the British Bulldogs just acted like they didn't care that we were going 80 and 90 down side streets. And the Ultimate Warrior was hell-bent on taking shortcuts to get to the arena in a town that he knew nothing about. So,
speaking of the Bulldogs and their ribs, probably the most infamous rib they ever pulled was, I don't know if they were actually involved in it, you might know more of the story, but the story of the British Bulldogs and the Rougeau brothers.
Oh.
Were you in the WWE?
Oh, I was there. I saw some of the ribs they were pulling on. The Rougeau brothers were very serious. In one town, while the Rougeau brothers were in the ring wrestling, I saw Dynamite Kid pull out a pair of scissors that long, sewing scissors, for seamstress would use, and cut their pants legs off at the knees, their street clothes pants legs off of both the Rougeau brothers off at the knees while they were in the ring. And so when they came back, and this had happened more than once, but this is one time that I actually saw it with my own eyes, and I remember I was laying down, stretching out my back on a bench, kind of watching it, and I really couldn't believe they were actually doing it, because when they came back into that room, that locker room, well, they were biding their time, You know, they knew something was going to happen, and it did happen, and they didn't sell it when they first saw their pants cut because they kind of expected it, and so nothing happened at that time. But eventually, something did happen, and I think it was the one of the Rougeau brothers, of course, Jacques.
Rougeau.
Yeah.
Because I guess there was an incident, they had accused the Bulldogs of cutting up their pants, the incident that you're talking about.
Right.
And the Bulldogs denied it, and later Rougeau was playing cards in the dressing room, and Dynamite came and slapped Jacques across the back of the head and beat on him a little bit, and Raymond was on crutches, so he couldn't do anything. And Dynamite said, I guess, when your knee's better, come and find me or something. And then there was this period of time where they were very angry, and I guess that led to the incident that you're about to tell us about.
He used a roll of coins in his hand to make the blow even more intense when he struck Dynamite Kid. I saw that actual incident. I saw the punch, and I saw Dynamite Kid spit out a couple teeth and say, "Hell of a shot." That's all he did. It's the only selling he did, and spit the teeth out and said, "Hell of a punch," and didn't fight back. And Rougeau walked away. And you don't forget something like that.
Yeah, he didn't go down.
Didn't go down.
Everyone was shocked at.
Yeah, but he hit him so hard, and with that roll of coins in his hand, but he knocked out some teeth and just spit the teeth out, Dynamite Kid, and just a hell of a shot.
So in those days, the locker room was kind of like high school all over again.
Oh.
Some of the antics.
Oh my God, nobody was safe. Well, I guess a few people. I was safe because I was very neutral, and there's some people that were safe. Hillbilly Jim was safe, but there were some wild things that were just, and the British Bulldogs were really out of control.
What about the Outback Jack story?
Oh, some of his. Oh.
Did you hear about the carpet?
No.
Okay. If you haven't heard about it, I won't ask you to tell it. But they rolled him up in a carpet and put a rope around it and chained it to the back of a van. And it was winter time, and they did circles with Outback Jack. I guess they drugged him up first. They shaved his head and shaved his eyebrows, and they rolled him in the carpet.
In a real carpet, and hooked him up to a real van and drove him around.
It was a hotel carpet.
Oh my God. Very dangerous times. Someone could have really snapped. Rougeau could have, other than hitting him with a rolled up thing of coins, could have put a knife in him or something. I mean, it was very serious. It was very tense. This was not play stuff. This was getting to the point that it was very, very, very serious on your health was at stake,
There was supposedly an incident between Dynamite and the Honky Tonk Man at some point around. Maybe it was after. It was over Harley Race having the stomach operation. Honky Tonk Man had jokingly made a comment, and apparently.
I was unaware of that.
I want to just say a good memory of the Honky Tonk Man.
Do I want to do I have a good memory?
Do you have anything?
No.
Did you not like him?
Oh yes, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I have no stories. The Honky Tonk Man, yes. First of all, he had such incredible longevity in the business that it's amazing that he's lasted so long. His career is so long. And I think that's because he is very smart in the way he's not abused his body, taking unnecessary falls something, taking a fall not even nearly the degree a Hannibal would take, not even close. But that's why he has so much longevity, and I know that he was a master at stalling for time to get time in during a match without even doing anything. It was very entertaining to watch him perform, and not even lay a hand on his opponent, but just simply stall for time to get time in on the clock and time in during the match, and then walk around his opponent and then walk up and down and do everything. And so he was quite an expert, a pro at that. And I believe his best asset was not taking serious bumps and falls to preserve his body so he could continue to wrestle to this day and draw well and perform well, because he did not take serious falls.
And what do you think of him as a singer?
As a singer, oh, top 40, number one hit.
We've actually performed together once.
You're kidding.
At the time of the big steroid trial with the FBI and WWE, you were making a lot of public appearances and basically speaking the truth about the steroid problems in wrestling at the time and the drug problems in wrestling. And at the time, a lot of people didn't believe you, but since then, many wrestlers have written books, and it's come out that they have admitted to taking steroids and drugs throughout their careers. And more than that, wrestler after wrestler after wrestler keeps dying at young ages due to sometimes cocaine overdoses or just heart failures, that probably had a lot to do with past drug use, dying at such young ages. Do you kind of feel redeemed now that nobody's going to say you were lying about that anymore because it's been proven?
Yeah, it's kind of a hard thing to say that I feel redeemed over people dying. That I don't think is the way to phrase it. And I know you didn't mean anything by that application of words, but I think it's very telling that, and very sad that we've lost so many wrestlers from drug abuse, and that in fact I wasn't making up stories like a lot of people, as you had just suggested, were saying that I was really prefabricating stories and stuff like that about drug use and steroid use and things like that. And so it's very ironic that it was almost like a prophecy that I was saying that has come to pass. And it's very tragic that people have had to lose their lives over the drug use. It's been an epidemic, basically. Nothing like it in any other sport.
And you were saying it because you suffered some injuries at the hands of steroid use. Do you want to talk about some of the effects that steroid use has on the body?
Yeah, of course. I had suffered avascular necrosis of the hips, and that's from prolonged steroid use and heavy doses. And what that is, it's a disease that shuts off the blood supply to the hip joint, and therefore the bone joint dies. And actually, my doctor who did my first hip replacement in 1987 coined the phrase "the death of a bone" from steroid use. And that phrase, "the death of a bone," is used in medical literature now all around the world. And that was the reason for my first hip replacement and my subsequent hip replacement and a future ankle fusion. And like my orthopedic surgeon has said, Dr. Lawrence Dorr, superstar, all your problems are caused by steroids. And so once it became rampant, and like you said, like you just mentioned, the people that have died from complications of steroid use and other drug use in pro wrestling is almost beyond belief. It's almost beyond belief. So many drug-related deaths in pro wrestling, for it to have ended up like this, it's tragic.
There was a famous interview at the time on the Arsenio Hall show with Hulk Hogan, who has since admitted to being a steroid user. At the time, he had said that he did not take steroids other than for medical purposes, and that you were a steroid abuser, and you had been a star in the 1970s. Now we've seen that Hulk Hogan has had many back operations, and I believe he's had quite a few surgeries, and he's admitted to steroid use and cocaine use in his book. How did you feel at the time that he was saying that stuff on TV about you lying when you knew it was true? And
yes, I recall that vividly, and I found it so strange that he would actually go on a national televised show and say that he had never used steroids, only for medical reasons, and I think that was 2 or 3 times he said that those were medical reasons, and that when I had just said earlier in this very interview that we're doing, that when I first met him in 1975, 76 time frame, that he told me he had been taking steroids, injecting himself with steroids for a full year before he met me. And he said that to my face. And then to get into his career, his extremely successful career, and then to go on to a national televised show like that and deny that he had ever taken steroids was almost so ridiculous that it was laughable. It was like, are you kidding me? How can you actually say that with a straight face, and then especially sitting there with a massive physique, that you couldn't build without the assistance of steroids, period. And then to put all the heat on me that I was really a steroid user and abuser. Yes, I was. I did use steroids. I did abuse steroids, but also Hulk had used them a full year before he even started wrestling, and had told me this. So I found that how could he commit to such a vicious lie on national television for the sake of preserving his image? And I didn't get it. It was really it really set me back. It really did. And I know that's he was an iconic figure. Still is an iconic figure. And ironically, that's what the judge said at the Dr. George Zahorian trial in Harrisburg about omitting Hulk Hogan from testifying. The judge actually said to the jury and the people in the courtroom that he had excused Hulk Hogan from testifying in this trial because he is such an iconic figure to young people, that him testifying, there's a quote from the judge, that him testifying would do more damage than it would good, because he has such an impact on young people in this country. And that's why the judge released him from having to testify in that trial.
Do you think some of his injuries could have been prevented had he not taken steroids?
Well, I'm not a doctor, and I'm not a fortune teller, and I'm not a seer, and I don't know, his total medical records, but I do know without a shadow of a doubt that abuse of steroids causes tremendous bone joint complications, and now that he has admitted, I guess in his book, that he was had used steroids, and there's no question that I believe his surgeries, all of his operations are linked to steroid use. There's just too many operations. You know, I mean, like I said, I don't know because I haven't seen his medical records, and it's just my speculation, but I would have to say yes, it's definitely related to steroid use.
And of course, you were his inspiration in getting into the wrestling business. Him and you were together in the 80s in some vignettes and at the first ever Slammy Awards. So you've been friends, and of course in the early 90s, you obviously went through a patch where you were enemies. How is it between you and Hulk Hogan today?
Oh, I think everything is fine. I don't know if it will be after this interview, but I'm just speaking the truth. That we've really years ago decided to bury the hatchet between us and put everything behind us, and everything. And I consider him, you know, there's no question he's an iconic figure in this business. There'll never be another Hulk Hogan, just like there'll never be another Arnold Schwarzenegger. There just won't be.
And everybody made those mistakes. He wasn't the only one.
Oh, of course, exactly right. And he's only human. And but I think I have said a lot of things that I wish I could have taken back on television in major broadcasts and things like that. But I found it bizarre that the judge would let Hogan go without testifying in the Zahorian trial because he felt it would do too much damage to children nationwide. But I guess because if you're on cereal box covers and you're Hulk Hogan and you're at your absolute prime, and the impact that you would have, it probably would have destroyed his image to children, millions of children.
All right, so now on to the Hep C stuff. Can you tell us how you found out you were Hep C positive?
Yeah, I found out that I had hepatitis C visiting my healthcare provider, my doctor. One day she was just looking at me, and I had a lot of red blotches on my skin, and she said, that looks like side effects from hepatitis C right here in Phoenix. Dr. Deborah Michael, she's retired now. And she says, those look like hepatitis C red, little red lesions. And she says, I'm going to test you for hepatitis C. I said, sure. And sure enough, she pulled my blood and came back positive for hepatitis C. And she said, you have hepatitis C, and, you know, we're going to have to decide what to do about this. This was, you know, I've had my liver transplant now coming up on 10 years, 2002. I had my liver transplant October of 2002. So by the time this airs, it's probably be past October. But nevertheless, I'm almost 10 full years into a liver transplant. And right before that, a couple years, I had suffered with side effects of hepatitis C before the transplant. And it was really, really, you know, a very, very disturbing fatigue and the bleeding, internal bleeding, and loss of appetite, and all kinds of complications from the hepatitis C virus in the liver, causing cirrhosis, causing scarring of the liver, which cuts the blood supply and blood flow of the liver. It shuts that off. And so things start to back up and go haywire, and it really gets nasty towards the end stages of hepatitis C in the liver.
Why didn't they try and treat you for it through the normal means of treatment when they first found out you had Hep C?
Well, they didn't want to treat right away. They wanted to keep an eye on me, and then for about the first 6 years of discovering that I had hepatitis C, I'm saying the first 6 years after my transplant is what I meant to say. They were testing me once a month, my blood, to check my liver enzymes here at the Mayo Hospital in Phoenix. And I'd gone out of town to visit my daughter for several months and was not available for monthly blood testing. And so they felt that since I wasn't testing on a regular monthly basis, that disqualified me by not having a constant blood count every month, was their reason for, the Mayo Clinic's reason for not putting me on a regimen to combat the hepatitis C virus. Okay. And I argued that point because I said, well, for one thing, I was out of town across the country, and I'd been faithfully getting my blood checked every month since my liver transplant up to that point, and but they drew a very tight line and denied it.
Did you think you may have caught Hep C from wrestling and all the blood matches you had right away, or were you kind of confused?
Oh, I knew it, and the doctors knew it. That they automatically felt that all the commingling of blood in professional wrestling, since it's a blood-borne disease, that I had definitely contracted hepatitis C from another wrestler bleeding on me into an open wound, and the doctors were totally convinced that the commingling of blood was how I contracted hepatitis C.
How many double blood matches do you think you had in your wrestling career?
Oh, uncountable. The decade of the 70s, especially the second half, were constantly blood matches. I mean, my God, it was just, you look back at the old wrestling magazines, and every wrestling magazine has a wrestler on the cover with blood on his face. If you look back at the old vintage magazines, and the decade of the 70s was nothing but bloodbath matches. And there's no question that I caught it during the 70s.
So you would say, just to give a guess, over 500 times at least? You
Yes, at least over 500 times that I had cut my own forehead and been in other matches with other wrestlers bleeding on me, and the commingling of blood, at least 500 times, sure.
What was the process of getting a liver transplant like?
The actual process was very easy. It went so, it was like, I was getting very, very sick, and I was put on the transplant list, and within a matter of weeks, I became the worst liver in the state of Arizona, and they put me number one. They moved me up to number one on the transplant list of the people available for a transplant when the liver became available to receive a transplant. And within about a week after being on the list, I received the transplant, and it was absolutely as major of a surgery as that is. It was absolutely nothing. As far as, I think I went through more pain through my hip replacements and more struggling to rehab with my hip replacement than a transplanted liver. They simply open you up and take the old liver out and put the new liver in. It's very simple.
Was it a scary moment?
Oh my God, yes, it was frightening that you're going to have another liver put in you, another major organ that does over like around 500 functions. I mean, my God, it was very. When we got the phone call, I was sitting with Valerie and got the phone call from the Mayo Clinic. Said, "Sir, we have your liver available. Get to the hospital now." Oh, man, the heart rate, your heart rate goes up, and we have the liver. I just got on the liver transplant list 1 week. I was only on 1 week, and a liver became available. A young girl, 23 years old, was killed in a car wreck. They kept her alive to harvest all of her organs, and it was absolutely, beyond. There was fright involved because you're gonna be put under. They're gonna open you up. I mean, they open you up. They open you up, and they cut that liver out, and that liver, they said was I saw my old liver. I went to the lab at the Mayo Clinic and actually looked at my old liver in a jar the size of a big thing that you get water out of, and it was full of scar tissue and the cirrhosis of scar tissue and swollen, almost the size of a basketball. And they cut that thing out of there, and they kept the young girl alive. She was only 23 years old. They kept her alive on life support system while they harvested her organs. And she was a donor. I got her liver. 2 Navajo Indian girls got her kidneys. A lady got her heart. And I got to the Mayo Clinic, and man, they cleaned me up. I showered, I cleaned up, they shaved, and got everything ready. And it's a liver transplant. I mean, my God, I'm getting somebody else's liver put in me, and a girl's liver. And that was one of the miracles of a liver transplant, that you can use female or male liver. They're interchangeable. It's the only organ that is interchangeable if you're male or female. And so the surgery went flawless, barely 4 hours, and normally it's a 7-hour surgery. Absolutely flawless. It was nothing more than me going to sleep and waking up with a new liver. And I instantly felt better when I came out of anesthesia, when I was, back awake again. And before, my urine was dark, and immediately my urine was honey color, normal color, clean. The liver was functioning perfect. The girl was only 23 years old. They never drank, never taken drugs. She was clean, clear, beautiful young lady, and an absolutely flawless, brand new, perfect liver. 23 years old, and it was like a miracle. And you go to sleep and you wake up with a new liver, and you feel the feeling of health was immediate, from being so sick and so fatigued and so drained and always and your urine is so dark, and problems with your stool and all kinds of complications health-wise, to instant health. As soon as they hooked it up, the urine became instantly clear. And so it was a major miracle. There's no question about it. And but it wasn't a traumatic thing to go through. It was actually a very joyful thing. There was no pain involved. It was a major, they had to cut you wide open to get all their hands to get that liver out and another one in. They really did some big cutting and lay you open, but that was it. It was easy. It was actually simple.
So now we're 10 years later. What's your Hep C situation like now?
Well, right now I'm still doing very good, and so I'm not scheduled for another intensive internal look by my liver doctor, Dr. Rodriguez, until next April, and so I'm really doing excellent, considering the length of time that I've had this liver. And he's very, very pleased with the last internal look that he took in last April. 212, and absolutely pleased with the way everything looks internally. And so he's very happy, very happy about my future with the new liver. He's 10 years old already, and the average lifespan is only 8 years with a new liver. So I've already gotten two more years out of it, So
All right, so we're just going to go through your WWE Hall of Fame briefly. So how did you find out you were going to be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame?
I found out that I was going to be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame by a personal phone call from Vince McMahon, who personally called every inductee to tell them that I was told that was the protocol. The Vince himself called all the inductees to tell them they were going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. And so I got a phone call from Vince. He said, "Superstar, I'm going to put you in the Hall of Fame." And I said, "Well, fantastic." And there it was. It was simple as that. Phone call from Vince McMahon, the date, the place, and
What was that night like for you, and what was it like to be inducted?
it was a great night. It was a fun night. I know it was very a lot of activity backstage with everybody. Big John Stubb was inducted that night. His son took his plaque for him and took his place. And Junkyard Dog was inducted that night. His daughter received an award for him, and so it was a great night. A lot of excitement. Everybody happy, very upbeat, and a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
And what an honor it must have been for one of the top stars in wrestling and the son-in-law of Vince McMahon, Triple H, to be the one that actually inducted you. Were you surprised when you heard that?
Yeah, I was happy. I was thrilled. And actually, Triple H asked me, would I mind if he inducted me? I said, would I mind? It'd be an honor for you to induct me. It'd be fantastic. And he said, would you mind if I quoted some of your rhymes in the induction? I said, of course not. It'd be fun. And so it was really a fun night. And to have Triple H do the induction was really a special icing on the cake to have that done by Triple H, because he really had his heart into it and really wanted to do it, and it meant a lot to him. It meant a lot to me,
With all your ups and downs with Vince over the years, what are your final thoughts on him?
Oh, well, first of all, I think he has been a brilliant promoter, and being in a free country like the United States of America, you're allowed to go out and promote your product into somebody else's hometown, and if they put up a car lot across the street from another used car lot, if they can't take the competition, they go out of business. So I applaud Vince for being the businessman that he's been. He's been very brilliant and dedicated and committed to the wrestling world. There's no question about that. There's no question. We have had some disagreements and misunderstandings through our entire relationship, but he himself, as a wrestling promoter, an entrepreneur, professional wrestling, I think is unparalleled. I don't think there's been anybody any sharper, any more aggressive, especially aggressive than Vince. He's put his whole heart and soul into it, and I applaud him for his accomplishments. I really do. You have to. You cannot say that anything else. But he's been a tremendous success.
Definitely. So you were part of the "Don't Bleed on Me" documentary that really brought into the public's eye the hepatitis C problem in professional wrestling. Do you think there is a problem with blood diseases in wrestling because of the practice of blading?
Oh, I believe there is, and I believe since the problem with hepatitis C is it can lay dormant for 20 or 30 years sometimes before it actually starts doing real damage to your liver, that there's a lot of guys, unfortunately, that are going to start showing up with hepatitis C, especially Hep C, and in professional wrestling, even though it's been years maybe since they contracted it, because it does lay dormant for so long in many cases before it starts doing damage. But I believe there's a real issue because of all the blood that's been shed in pro wrestling and the commingling of that blood, almost irreverently just cut yourself and and just bleed on me and I'll bleed on you. Well, we don't want it. Don't bleed on me. No more. I mean, it's just they need to stop it completely. I don't get it why they're still doing it. TNA, for example. I just be honest with you. I don't get it why TNA is still cutting their heads, letting their wrestlers cut their heads with the diseases that are out there, especially hepatitis C. I don't understand that mindset whatsoever.
Do you think there's wrestlers out there that haven't gone public about them having Hep C but know that they have Hep C? Of course, it's been rumored. Former TNA wrestler who bled in TNA, Nigel McGuinness, it's been rumored heavily that he has it, yet he hasn't come out public about it. I'm sure there's other older wrestlers from your era that may know they have it but haven't gone public. Do you agree with me?
I agree 100% that they are totally not revealing that they have hepatitis C because they don't want to lose their job, number one. And most importantly, they don't want to lose their job. And so they're going to conceal the fact. But I believe there's a multitude of wrestlers. They have to. With all the bleeding that's been going on in professional wrestling, there has to be a multitude of wrestlers with not only hepatitis C, but possibly HIV from blood.
And there's also the point that even if they're retired, they may have bled a lot in the past, and that's just...
Oh, well, that's exactly what I'm saying. Yes, even though you're retired, it makes no difference. You've already did the bleeding and the commingling of the blood, so it could be there.
Put a black mark on your career. Yeah. Is there a difference in what's more likely, just bleeding in a match with someone, or is there a difference if someone's actually cutting somebody else with a blade with blood on it? Would that actually increase the risk?
Oh, I don't believe there's any comparison to the difference of the simple commingling of blood as opposed to someone cutting you with a razor blade that they have already cut themselves with, and then purposely cutting you with that same identical razor blade that they have just inserted barbarically into their own forehead, and then cutting your head with the same razor blade. I think the odds are astronomically higher that if that person has hepatitis C, it is a given you're going to receive hepatitis C from that blade that he just put in his head. It's just automatic.
Is that common practice in a professional wrestling match in the 2000s to use a blade with hepatitis C, or an unsanitary blade, let's call it? Is it common practice to use an unsanitary blade on another wrestler?
I would certainly hope not. I would certainly hope not as a common practice. My God, if I found out that somebody did that to me, I'd probably kill them in the ring after they did it. But I don't believe it's. I believe it's a rare thing. I believe you got to be almost demonically obsessed and possessed to cut another wrestler with your razor blade, especially if you know that you're infected with hepatitis C. Even if you don't know that you're infected with hepatitis C, but to use your same razor blade on your head and then cut your opponent's head with the same exact razor blade is unforgivable. It's an unforgivable sin. It's unacceptable.
In wrestling, are we playing characters and performing? Or Abdullah the Butcher, for example, if I were to have a match with him, should I actually believe that he's a crazed madman from Sudan that's gonna fork me?
Well, we know that we're all actors. I mean, we're all predetermined winners and losers, but we don't know that the other man has hepatitis C, and we certainly would not go into a match knowing that the other man has hepatitis C and is going to cut your head with his same exact razor blade. I don't believe there's a person on earth that would do that. That's just not even a normal reaction.
So in your opinion, when I entered into the match where I believe Abdullah passed me Hep C by cutting me with the razor blade, that wasn't a risk that I assumed going into the match?
Oh my God, no! You would have never gone into the match if you assumed that risk. If you thought that for 1 second he was going to cut you with a razor blade that he just cut himself with, and use that same blade on you, and he has hepatitis C, you would have never gone into the match knowing that. Of course not. It's not even logical. A child could figure that answer out.
Now, you, along with a lot of other known legends in wrestling, such as the Honky Tonk Man, and according to Atlantic Magazine, even Hulk Hogan, he tweeted about Abdullah being inducted into the Hall of Fame. Here, I'll rephrase that for this. According to Atlantic Magazine, you and even Hulk Hogan protested Abdullah the Butcher's induction into the Hall of Fame. Why did you protest his induction?
Well, I protested his induction on the very reason that when I became aware, first of all, he had never wrestled for the WWE. Why would they induct someone who's not even ever wrestled for them into their Hall of Fame? And secondly, the way he has conducted himself his entire career of cutting other people, with razor blades and cutting his own self, living on his lust for blood would be a good term for him. That he has this unnatural lust to bleed, and for the fact of what he did to you by cutting you with his razor blade, knowing that he's got hepatitis C, is unmentionable, is an unpardonable sin. A man who goes around cutting other people's heads with his own razor blade against their will and against their unknown knowledge, going into a match not knowing he's going to do it, or else why would they go into the match?
So from what you've seen of Hannibal's wrestling ability, Devin Nicholson's, what do you think of him as a wrestler?
I think Hannibal, as a professional wrestler, is one of the top echelon of pro wrestlers to ever step foot inside of a wrestling ring. I mean, his talent is without question, and his not only his talent, but his inner love for the professional wrestling business, which gives him a cutting-edge advantage in his talent because of his drive and his focus, advances him way far above even the best of wrestlers. He is absolutely at the top of the pecking order of skill and absolute focus and drive and determination and love for the sport of professional wrestling.
Do you think I would have done well in the WWE if my contract had gone through?
Yeah, there's no question that if Hannibal was allowed back in the WWE, he would be a main event draw and sell out buildings all across the country and around the world. There's no question in my mind, without a doubt. Hannibal is one of the best wrestlers ever to step foot inside a professional wrestling ring. Yeah, I've seen the promotional interview that Hannibal has done challenging Kurt Angle, and I think it's one of the greatest promotional attempts by any professional wrestler, and I really am disappointed in Kurt Angle not accepting the challenge by Hannibal to step inside the ring and really decide who the best wrestler is.
And completely shoot now, what do you think of Kurt Angle making this big deal that he was going to do the Olympics, getting all this publicity for a year, taking publicity away from legitimate athletes that deserved it, and then basically giving up without even trying when he didn't even have a serious injury.
Yes, it was so unfortunate to see Kurt Angle, his attempt at persuading the world that he was going to train and become another, go to the London Olympics, and to have no real intentions of doing it. I think it was the most deceptive thing a person could possibly do, and it was the biggest lie, outright lie, that a person could do, to say that for almost a full year leading up to the Olympics. So it's very, very disheartening, but that's the way it is, and that's what happens, and it happened, and it'll go down in history as one of the biggest deceptions ever by a professional wrestler.
Why do you think he did it?
I don't know why he did it. He had only for publicity. I mean, I think everything in professional wrestling basically is driven for publicity, and this, I believe, was a premier publicity stunt by Kurt Angle to promote himself as going to the Olympics and competing when he had no intention whatsoever of going to the Olympics. Pure publicity.
And how does it make professional wrestling look when he says he's too injured to do the Olympics, but he never misses a night of house shows or TV tapings for a small professional wrestling company in southern USA?
It was very disturbing for him to make such a huge deal of going to the Olympics and then not going, and then wrestling every night, booked by TNA and
wrestling on the same pay-per-view that same weekend.
Yeah, doing a pay-per-view on that very same weekend, and then going to, of course, to other cities and other small venues around the country, and after that is absolutely it just made professional wrestling giving it more of a black eye, I think, than it's ever given. It was really disheartening and disgusting, actually.
Now let's talk about one of the greatest wrestlers ever, in my opinion. I just want to know what your opinion is of The Undertaker.
Oh, my opinion of The Undertaker is one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. I must say that I myself am a huge fan of The Undertaker, and especially his longevity. He's got into 20 full years now, and he is so. I have seen people mesmerized by him. I was mesmerized by him when I first saw him, and so I believe that he's probably one of the greatest. There's no question he is one of the greatest ever to set foot inside of a wrestling ring, and his legacy is beyond reproach. He's the most entertaining performer probably ever to step foot inside of a ring.
Okay, now we're on to the last part, just your current projects. Do you want to tell us a bit about yourself as an artist?
I really enjoy my artwork. I consider it an extension, actually, of my in-ring performance, because I always consider myself an artist more than I did a wrestler while I was participating in professional wrestling. And I think that art is a great gift to have, and I've really enjoyed painting certain wrestlers, such as Ric Flair, so colorful. Painting, I've done paintings of the Iron Sheik, for example, which is one of the most unusual characters you'll ever run across. I had to paint him, and right now I'm actually painting a real nice portrait of Hannibal, which I'm going to reveal to the world, and which I'll be very proud of. And so it's been more than a hobby. I sell professionally. I sell my artwork to different people around the United States and actually out of the country. And so I just consider my artwork, my actual artwork, an extension of my in-ring artwork, because I consider that more of artwork as an actual wrestler. So I'm very, very excited about my future in professional art, and looking forward to doing more and accomplishing more. And my favorite artist of all time and my inspirational artist is Rembrandt. And so I'm very, very proud of my artwork and very thankful that I have the talent.
What's your greatest fear?
Fear of the unknown. That's good. That's good, because I'm a big Bob Dylan fan. You know that. And he, God, I was just listening to one of his songs the other day about when he was mentioning fear, and I was going to write it down because I thought I would use it in one of these promos. I didn't write it down, so I forgot it. But that's a hard question. That's a hard question. Greatest fear of the unknown, fear of the unknown, and
what would you like your ultimate legacy to be in this business?
I would like my legacy to be that I was really a creative artist in the world of professional wrestling, and that I inspired Hulk Hogan's and Jesse Ventura's and Scott Steiner, who I really, really admire his physique and his dedication and commitment to bodybuilding. He's such an inspiration, and for me to have influence on his career is a real compliment to me. And I just want my legacy to be that I've inspired other great wrestlers to go on and to attain great heights in professional wrestling, and that I was a more of an entertainer than a technical wrestler, no question about it, because I thought there was more value for me to entertain wrestling fans than to try to perform something that I wasn't capable of doing, but I was capable of entertaining.
And since you brought it up, just for if we ever put out a Scott Steiner DVD, which is likely, you want to just talk about him just maybe for a minute, just a little more detail?
Yeah, Scott Steiner to me is one of the, obviously has one of the greatest physiques I've ever seen in professional wrestling or out of professional wrestling. And I'm just amazed. I was thrilled to meet him for the first time in 212 and at an autograph event in Los Angeles, and so impressed by him. And I'm just one of his biggest fans. And I kind of feel now how other people have felt meeting me for the first time, because I felt that certain tingle when I met Scott Steiner, because I'm such a huge fan of his, and I really appreciate his dedication and commitment to bodybuilding, and of course to wrestling, obviously, but his commitment and focus and drive to attain a physique that he's attained is really quite amazing. And I think it ranks right up there with the Arnold Schwarzenegger type drive that a person takes that you have to have a physique like that.
If I'm cured of Hep C, should WWE give me another chance?
Yeah, I really believe that the wrestler Hannibal, who's one of my favorite wrestlers of all time, actually, there's no question about that. Once he is cured, I believe he's going to be cured of hepatitis C, should definitely be given another opportunity to wrestle for the WWE, because he's such a talented wrestler that it would be an absolute unjust and absolute waste of their time and their whole company not to utilize his ability and his talents in the WWE. So I believe they should definitely give him another opportunity, because he will be clean from hepatitis C in the near future.
Okay, so a couple questions I was thinking of. A video came out recently of an interview with Abdullah where he talks about he gave away his Hall of Fame ring. First of all, what do you think? What's your opinion on that?
Yes, concerning Abdullah the Butcher, I've heard the interview of him talking about giving away his Hall of Fame ring after 51 years of dedicated service of wrestling, but dedicated service to who? All he is, in my opinion, Abdullah the Butcher, is a felon who committed a felony assault and battery with a deadly weapon by using a razor blade contaminated with hepatitis C to cut another man's head purposely, and that he has no right, no justification whatsoever being in the WWE Hall of Fame or anybody's Hall of Fame, let alone giving an award, a ring, which he has given away, which I don't know who would want because it's probably infected with hepatitis C, just the ring itself. So that's my thoughts on Abdullah the Butcher. And also another thought concerning Abdullah the Butcher, when he said he worked 51 years wrestling in the wrestling business for 51 years, and all they give me is a ring. Well, what else does he expect? What did he deserve for 51 years of mutilating other people and giving his ring away? I had to sell my ring. I sold my ring because I needed medical attention and medical supplies to keep me alive and living, because medication costs money. And so that was the reason I sold my WWE Hall of Fame, was for medical purposes, not because I was just simply disgruntled with the company, but to keep me alive medically.
About Lanny, some kind of story about Lanny. It could be anything.
But I don't want to personally talk about his unnatural.
According to him, he told me it's normal. There's a name for it, autophilacia. It's all over the internet. Just search it. It's like
oh yeah, everybody does it. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Oh God. Oh, anyway.
Keeping a straight face during that interview was my worst torture. We're just sitting there, yes, Lanny.
Oh, jeez. Oh, jeez. One thing about Lanny Poffo is his natural ability to create these phenomenal poems and poetry, and I think really besides kind of the comical ones he does some very serious poetry work. And he did a poem for me that was directed to Shelley Duvall, the actress, one of my favorite actresses of all time, when she was played against with the famous actor Jack Nicholson in The Shining. And so he wrote a poem for me, from me, that was supposed to be from me to Shelley Duvall, and then I autographed the photo, and he wrote the poem. And it was a very, very touching poem, and she actually wrote me back and gave me a picture thanking me for the poem. So thank you, Lanny, and he's very talented, and that's just one of his many talents, but that's the best one I can think of right now that's acceptable for a general audience. Terry Funk?
Yeah.
Oh, Terry Funk. Talking about Terry Funk, as I believe we were talking earlier, Hannibal and I, about how tough he is, one of the toughest human beings really on the face of the earth, to take the abuse he's taken in professional wrestling. And I believe that, in my opinion, he's one of the greatest performers of all time, and psychologically, his mental approach to professional wrestling is unparalleled. He has such great ring psychology, and his performance level and his ability to take punishment is amazing. And I'm just so impressed with him that I rate him up there with the Harley Races, the select few that are really icons and really legends that you can apply those words to. That would be to a Terry Funk, who is a very rare individual.
And you even did a painting of him.
And I did a painting. I did a portrait of Terry Funk. I felt compelled to put him on canvas. I did a special painting for Terry and presented to him in New Jersey at a big autograph signing event that was very successful and a lot of fun, and he's thrilled with it. And I'm thrilled with it, and it really, really came out nice. Among, like I said earlier, a Ric Flair, an Iron Sheik painting. I'm doing a Hannibal painting that is really going to be an awesome, probably one of my favorite paintings. I can feel already. Artists have feelings about certain artwork, and I really have a great feeling about this painting I'm doing for Hannibal. So that'll be broadcast everywhere when it's finished.
Eddie Guerrero writes in his book that he knew you since he was, Eddie Guerrero writes in his book that he first met you when he was 16, and he was really in awe when he met you and was in the same dressing room as you, and you've had a bit of a relationship with him over the years. Can you explain to us about that relationship that even extended to his funeral?
Oh yes, Eddie Guerrero is really. You talk about talent. I'm sure he would be rated as one of the most talented wrestlers ever. I've always been very fond of the whole Guerrero family. Really, having wrestled Chavo in 1972 in Los Angeles, going all the way back that far back, and. But Eddie is really a special person, was a special person, and had a lot of influence on me, and by his conversion and commitment to Christianity, and his real, you could tell that it was true, and he was really an honest person, and it's changed, and I just felt it was an honor being around him, and he always inspired me. Being around him because of his manners and his softness and his gentleness and his being so accommodating and so nice and so gentlemanly and being so great in the ring and such a dedicated wrestler, and it's just it's been an amazing relationship, and he's sorely missed. He really is, you know.